Howdy, friends. Welcome to another live Oddcast. And tonight's special guest is brand new correspondent for Rebel News Australia, journalist and all-round provocateur in waiting, I guess, Rukshan. Welcome him to the show. Howdy.
Hey, Carlz. Good to be here. Good to be here. And I'm glad to be here without Topher around. And I think Avi might not be around today as well. So it's great. It's just you and me. I think the sane people are here.
The sane people, the talented people, and the ridiculously good people, good-looking people.
Yes, true.
That's it. We've left the special children away. Topher's obviously away, and Avi is driving back from the country somewhere.
Yeah, he's driving back from the country. He was trying to make it. Trust me, he was trying to make it because there's nothing more that he loves than being center stage. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work out with his travel plans today.
That's all right. We can live without Avi. There's so much to talk about. I actually think this is the most exciting time, sans COVID, to be talking about Australian politics. There's so much happening. Do you agree?
I think so, yeah. It's buzzing. Everyone is engaged in the discussion as well. Everyone's got viewpoints. There's a little bit of less restrictions on social media as well. So, I'm saying that in a good way. We're getting a lot of different views across and people are using platforms to express themselves via videos. And so I think it's been great in terms of the political landscape and the discussions that we're having. So I would say it's exciting, especially, I think we're going to touch on this later today, with what's happening around One Nation in Australia as well. So that's really kind of opened it up to these very diverse, using that word in a positive way, diverse commentaries that we're getting now about the situation in Australia.
100%. And it's bred a whole new league of political commentators. A lot more people, I think, are feeling not only confident to put their opinions out there, but, are feeling compelled to participate in the discussion. And this is a point I've made frequently in the past, is that traditionally Aussies are really apathetic when it comes to politics. And because we could be, right? Like, life was pretty okay for the most part. But now, post-COVID, now, living through arguably a recession and all these changes that Albo's trying to implement, everything's really hostile, everything's really polarized. I think it's pushed people to a point where they understand that voting has consequences, and incorrectly voting or voting without considering the policies and who the person is that you're putting into parliament can have some pretty dire flow-on effects. And we're seeing that now. I mean, Albo campaigned for the last election promising he wouldn't touch capital gains, and now he's just reneged on that and turned around, and it turns out people aren't very happy, and he doesn't seem to have the balls to take it to election. I heard, was it John Howard talking about this on Carlz this morning?
Okay, yeah, was he talking about that? I've heard, I think Angus Taylor as well was saying he should put it to an election. The capital gains, obviously the negative gearing as well. Lots of very obvious broken promises. And that's not a new thing for politicians, obviously. Like, this is something that they do all the time. But these are pretty major changes that we're seeing in Australia in terms of policy. And it makes sense that people are saying, take it to a vote, put it to the people, call an early election. Now, I don't know the exact mechanisms around that, but you're seeing people's frustrations coming through. People are really frustrated about the situation they find themselves in. And I think, again, like you said, people are paying attention to politics because it's impacting them, which is a great thing. But we do tend to lapse back into being apathetic. I saw during the COVID times, everyone was awake and kind of aware of how politics can impact your life. And then people got comfortable again when things went back to some type of normality. And we're finding ourselves again, being screwed over by our politicians in a very callous manner. They're almost saying, well, yeah, we broke the promises, so what? We've got a new vision, or there's new circumstances, or it's like this, they come up with these new terms, right, to explain why they're breaking promises. And I think people are just sick of it, which is a good thing in the long run. It just depends on how long we can maintain this momentum and we don't lapse again into giving these guys free rein without having accountability.
I think the biggest thing I've noticed, and I think this is, whether or not people can articulate it this way, but the biggest thing I think people are feeling right now is the contempt that the political class has for the everyday Australian. And I mean, this is on both sides. So to be clear, I'm not saying that the Liberals are any better, but when they talk about the average Australian, you know, it's almost like they're mocking us. It's almost like they know that they have the power to do whatever they need to help their mates out. And, you know, traditionally in politics, that's how it worked. Whether you're a lobbyist or you're some kind of backroom power broker, you're able to structure things in a way that's beneficial for you. And, you know, maybe the Australian public gets a little bit. And when you're not going through a cost of living crisis, when you're not going through a global pandemic, for the most part, people don't really notice. I mean, some people do, more politically astute people do, but your average Joe who's just trying to raise their kids and get to work and live their life, they're not really paying attention. But now all of a sudden you have so many things all compounding all at once. And then you hear Anthony Albanese talk about us. And there was a clip a couple of weeks ago where he was joking about I think it was a 40-year-old man who was talking about how he wasn't able to afford a house. And the way in which Albo spoke about it was just full of contempt. And that's what he, you know, I always say, when people say what they say, believe them at their word. That's the real Albo. You know, the performative version that he puts out in front of a news press conference or in front of a reporter, that's the manufactured Albo. The real one's the guy in Parliament House slinging mud across the political aisle, and he says exactly how he feels. And I think now, like you alluded to this before about X, right? Since Elon took over X, that's put all the tech bros in line. So Zuck's taken the boot off the neck of Meta, and people are now able to exchange their political opinions much more freely. And also everyone has a mobile phone now, right? So whether it's a live event happening and someone's been able to film it and clip it, it's up on social media before the political class is able to position themselves around it and figure out what their take is. So the Australian public is seeing things, making up their opinion before the political spin started. And then the same with politics. I mean, I don't know many people who watch the parliamentary sessions and listen to our politicians sitting there in their hearings. But when the clips make it to social media and people are fast now, it's gone viral before they've addressed it. And so it's really hard for the political spin machine on both sides of the fence to get ahead of it. And I think that's what makes it so exciting at the moment.
That has made a huge difference just on those clips. Like, you know, obviously we had the recent debate around whether men can get pregnant and all these kind of things, which sounds ridiculous, but that went viral around the world. And you're right. If you go back a few decades, those discussions would have happened in those parliament's estimates committees or whatever they're having. And it would have maybe made it onto the news, but it would have been framed exactly the way the news wanted to have it framed. But what we're seeing now is with the democratization of the way that people access news as well as make news, that's meant that there's more eyeballs on the crazy things that they're doing inside Parliament, which again is a good thing. Obviously, there's a downside to it as well, because some things can get pushed to the front in terms of a social issue or a cultural issue that might not necessarily require that type of attention, but just because of the way that people, you know, things go viral. And I've seen that happen a few times as well. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm just saying sometimes our priorities might get skewed by the fact that something becomes viral in the political landscape, and you have politicians reacting to the virality of something rather than what they might need to be doing at that exact moment. I think that's an issue with this. But overall, it's been very good that this has happened through social media. But there is a fight back on, and even today I heard David Littleproud from the Nationals being interviewed on Sky News, and they were pushing back against the algorithm. Like, they're using this term a lot, the Liberals, as saying that, you know, the popularity of Pauline Hanson is because of the algorithm, and should we really trust the algorithms and the way that this has been used or manipulated? You know, shouldn't the fourth estate now, the media, the mainstream media, also have a role in understanding, you know, the rise of One Nation and, you know, testing out Pauline Hanson's policies or questioning her? And, you know, she's appearing on the press club on Wednesday after 30 years. The first time they've actually allowed her the ability to use that platform on the ABC. So these kind of debates are happening. And I think, again, for politicians, how they react to it and how they, you know, come around social media, especially, and this new way of doing news will be really important to their careers, because Pauline Hanson is sitting on 1 million followers on social media, and that today is capital. That means something. Whereas Angus Taylor, the leader of the opposition, he's sitting on like 60,000 followers or something. Now, it doesn't really matter in the real world, but in politics, the more eyeballs you can get in front of using a free medium like social media makes a massive difference. So these are things that these politicians are going to have to contend with. And right now, One Nation, Pauline Hanson, they're doing it similar to what we saw, the Trump effect in the Americas during 2016 and even 2020, 2024. That kind of magic is working for One Nation, and the other parties don't seem to have that at the moment.
100%. I mean, it's definitely a populist movement. And I've said as well, it's reminiscent of 2015 Trump, right? Coming down the escalator, promising to drain the swamp. I think that speaks volumes. And it's not, I love how the left are using this as like Trumpian politics now. It's like MAGA light or whatever, or Timu Trump and whatever else they're trying to coin on both Pauline and the Liberals. But, again, I mentioned contempt because whenever you hear the political class and also the media, especially like Patricia Calvaris from ABC, right? They talk about Trump voters, and now they're talking about One Nation voters as if they're numpties, right? These are low IQ individuals, uneducated. And a big part of the pollsters, and this gets brought up a lot, when you look at the polls, whether it's Redbridge or YouGov or whoever, there's always there, like, whether or not they're university educated and their demographics, right? And the left love to say, oh, all One Nation supporters are uneducated. They're basically like inbred, hillbillies. And again, I keep saying contempt because what you're talking about are people who are usually hardworking people who live in rural areas or regional areas. They're people who went straight into a trade from high school. So they've probably got developed small businesses or even medium-sized businesses. These aren't people who've gone through the university and academia indoctrination camps. And so these are people who are actually probably more likely to be critically thinking. They're people who have skin in the game because they've probably established a business or they've worked in the private sector for so long. So they understand, at least basic economics. And so whenever people pull out these sledges towards One Nation supporters or Liberal supporters, there's all these knuckle dragging Neanderthals. Again, it just makes people realize the political class and their extension, the mainstream media, hate us. And I think that is the part where people go, you know what? Excuse my French, but fuck you. Enough of this. There's no one there that's representing me. They don't speak for me. And so, yeah, we're like, we've seen the new campaign, Fire the Liar, Ditch the Witch, all this sort of stuff. That's people fighting back. And what I find really interesting, of course, is that the spin's always like, oh, ditch the witch. That's so sexist. But it's not horrible to call Peter Dutton Voldemort or to call all of us who support Pauline Nazis. So it's cracking that conversation open a lot. And I think prior to COVID, the mainstream media was able to sort of put those bumpers in place so that the conversation sort of stuck on a very narrow field. And now it's everywhere all at once. And that has its own problems. But this is why I'm very excited, because all of a sudden, everything that Pauline's been saying the last 30 years, people are like, my God, that woman was speaking common sense, and that the rose-colored glasses are coming off now.
Yeah. I mean, there's just the results are so shit in the country. Like, things are so bad that the people that are trying to keep control and, lead people in certain directions, I'm talking about people in the mainstream media or the political class, the results aren't there for even people to be like, oh yeah, I'm comfortable enough to ignore this. So the reality is people are going to push back, and they're not going to be caught up, being dissuaded by things like, oh, it's really mean to call someone a witch or something like this. We're well beyond that stage, especially in a state like Victoria with what we're going through. More than calling Jacinta Allen a witch, I think the things that the Labor Party's been involved in, billions and billions of dollars of debt, I think people would be more worried about how that happened, or the criminality, perhaps, including the CFMEU in some of these deals and some of the things that happen in the back rooms. That's much worse to people than someone calling Jacinta Allen a witch. And overall, I don't even think calling someone a witch is really a bad thing, because it's not really, doesn't have the connotations that she's trying to imply around misogyny and things like this. If you're going to be in the political theater, and this is someone like Daniel Andrews, I remember during the women's, Moira Deeming and those lovely women that had their rally, and there was great gay crash by Nazis. What did Daniel Andrews do? He was just calling all these grandmothers and, ladies or whatever that were there Nazis. So this is from a political party and a side that are able to freely slur people and use whatever terms they want to when they feel like it's necessary for their particular ideological causes. But God forbid you might say something And then, you have the all the different ministers in the federal government writing letters about how it's so mean and misogynistic and all these things. No one's buying it anymore because I think everyone just sees through the BS, and which is a good place to be as a public. Like, we can see the BS. It's really then how you channel that energy and ensure that makes a difference. And people are channeling that energy towards One Nation right now, which is why there's an argument that it is a bit of a protest vote at the moment. It's not a vote, but you know what I mean? The sentiments through a protest sentiment, like people are just frustrated. But then it's really around how we channel that in a positive way that it makes change going forward. And these polls, we've got 2 years left before the federal election at least. Like, it's a long time in politics, 2 years. Yeah. Anything could happen. And it's really around, how all of us that are involved in this space as well, and everyone watching at home, how we channel this energy and keep this momentum to actually make a difference in the upcoming elections.
Yeah, you make a really good point. And just on the name calling, for example, calling us Nazis, I mean, it's no different to calling us cookers or conspiracy theorists or homophobes, transphobes, like every pejorative under the sun. Once you've been called them a few times, they mean nothing. I mean, I get called a Nazi and a grifter and a bigot all in one sentence now. And I'm like, anything else? Like, I've collected all the patches for the sash. And so, I mean, everyone knows that politics is a bit of a gutter game anyway. But now when it's come to the, something I've noticed a lot, and I wonder if you've picked up on this as well, whenever they're addressing the politicians are addressing the public through the media, it's always like, oh, it's the Liberal Party's fault or it's the Labor Party's fault. It's always just pointing fingers, right? Pauline Hanson is probably the only one. I mean, David Limbrick, obviously from the Libertarians, and a handful of others do it as well. Address the actual problem. This is the problem. This is where I see it going wrong, and this is how I think we could fix it. When it comes to Anthony Albanese, talking about the economy, he's still blaming bloody Scott Morrison for it. Oh, well, this is the economy we inherited from Scott Morrison. Yeah, mate, that was like 6 years ago now. You've actually already had a term of government, and you're making it worse. And so I think the other thing is as well, someone like Albo's been in politics a really long time, 30 years or something, right? So he's been there back when the ABC was that bastion of truth, when everyone really understood that the ABC was like genuine news. And I think a lot of them are still clinging back to the point where you could grab the papers and make sure that the first thing on the front page of the paper next day was exactly what you wanted it to be. And, you could get in front of the nightly news. Whereas now, thanks to X and Meta and whatever else social media platforms people are using, that it's actually moving so fast, which is dizzying. You don't have enough time to digest it all. But at the same time, that dizzying allows us to actually really extract the truth because, like I said before, there's no political spin. But hearing Albo constantly deflect, constantly gaslight us, I think it just makes people go, well, fuck off then, right? Like, Australians are never kind of going to be the riot, burn down the streets type. I mean, maybe some of the socialists in Fitzroy. But as far as Aussies behaving like the French, we're not going to pick up like, the torches and the pitchforks. The way Aussies show disdain is through disinterest, right? Like, it's through apathy. Yes. They turn their shoulder to you. And I think what you're seeing now is a lot of Aussies joined the progressive politics because that was the expectation through COVID and things like that. And people are like, okay, well, I'll accept trans people. I'll wear the rainbow lanyard. I'll put my black square up, all that performative stuff. And then it gets to a point where when you're genuinely in economic strife or when things are actually getting difficult, that kind of performative virtue signaling stuff, like, who's got time for that crap? Now people are worried about whether or not they can turn their heaters on in winter. People are worried about whether they're going to be able to pass down their wealth to their children or be able to maintain like their investments through capital gains. And so all of that stuff starts falling away. So all of a sudden you start calling people racist, Nazis and whatever. And they're like, yeah, that's cool. I need to talk about like my financial situation because it's quite precarious at the moment. And so I think our political leaders are failing to see that. And I know this because I see a lot of the leftist pundits, and I hate pitting it left versus right, but that's the best way to express it. Hannah Ferguson from Cheek Media, Punters Politics, Friendly Geordie's, boy, is he melting down over One Nation. All of them are trying to get in front and trying to point us, again, paint us all like these knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. And what they're, again, all of these guys are missing is these are actually incredibly astute, incredibly successful, independent, critically thinking people who are now awake to politics. And I don't think they're prepared for the avalanche that's coming. I really don't.
Yeah, but on those like commentators, for instance, on the left, they are being forced to concede some positions that they haven't done in the past, especially around topics like immigration, even friendly Geordies. Like they are making concessions on certain points, but they're trying to reframe the debates. They're trying to reframe the arguments and say, it was under the Liberals that it was really bad, the immigration. Albanese has actually brought immigration down. Like they kind of become the anti-immigration mob. You know what I mean? Like we're really tough on immigration, guys. Labor's really tough. So they are doing this kind of, shuffling of the chairs and trying to get their messaging right. And they are struggling because they're not meeting where the Australian people are at. And we're seeing that even with some more notable names, perhaps, that are speaking out now, that are coming around this because they are finding themselves not meeting where the Australian people are at. And when I'm talking about the Australian people, I'm not saying everyone. Obviously, this country is not a people of a monolith. But in general terms, like you said, most people are feeling the impacts of what's happening. And they are squarely blaming politicians for this. Like they're saying, this is you guys. Like they're pointing the finger at the politicians. So if you're a social media commentator that's always defended Labor, for instance, regardless of what they do, you've always defended them. Someone like a Friendly Geordies, well, they're in a tough position now. If you're a previous, comedian or a current comedian, you've always defended Labor and you've pushed certain ideologies that Labor you've aligned with, which are Labor ideologies. Now, all of a sudden, you're at this precipice where it's like, well, everyone that's listening to me and following me, their life sucks. How can I convince them? I can't. It's so bad. I can't even convince them now through the sheer will of lying. You can't even lie about these things because it's just so in your face. You go to shops, you talk to your family members, everyone's feeling it. So you can't trick people, and that's what they're contending with.
And the thing about the way the economy is at the moment, it all works at scale, right? Like it doesn't matter whether you're a working poor or whether you're middle class or you're someone who's in that sort of higher wealth bracket. We're all in feeling that cost of living crisis, right? Like, whether you have a $400,000 mortgage or a $4 million mortgage, a rate increase is a rate increase. Same with the groceries, same with your petrol. And obviously people at the higher end of the scale have more surplus so they can absorb some of those stresses. But, it means things like businesses stop recruiting. Businesses stop putting on more staff. There's less job opportunities, and they might start making some redundancies and pulling things back. And so what you see is the private sector starts to shrink, and that obviously impacts some people's livelihoods. And the only thing that's growing is the public sector. And at the moment, we know with the magnitude of the debt, both at a state level and at a federal level, that it's unsustainable. And it's interesting, I don't think it's one main issue that's really pissing people off. You could say it's post-COVID economic unrecovery, or it's cost of living and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's a combination of things. Like, for example, if you have a child who's genuinely disabled and genuinely needs support from the NDIS, and you're going through the rigmarole of trying to get on there and organize your provider and whatnot, and then you see someone who gets a fake, well, I shouldn't say fake, but a mild diagnosis for autism, and then all of a sudden they're getting their Thermomix, and then over here you've seen people in Lakemba who are rorting the system, and people kind of go, hang on a minute, I'm not getting that, and I genuinely need it. Like my child is nonverbal or whatever it could be, right? And then, so that might be that person's particular gripe. And then on the other side, it could be the small business community who's just been told, hey, there's another increase in the minimum wage. And they're going, wow, my staff are not now costing me $45 an hour. I can't afford them anymore. I'm going to have to be the barista in the cafe, and I'm going to have to fire that university kid who's now costing me over $1,000 a week because that's the minimum wage now. And so everyone's feeling these issues in a different way. And I think politicians forget that people talk. People exchange this information. And so what it is, it's a whole bunch of different grouse fires. And then add on top of that, global politics as well, whether it's, what's going on in America and the rise of fascism and, the swing to the far right in Southern America and all that. People are looking around and going, well, who do I trust now? And then you get Albo up there, who basically comes out and says, yeah, I lied to you, but whatever, I'm the Prime Minister. People kind of go, no, I'm not buying this crap anymore. And I think I've made this comment before, Oddies will know, we are going through a cycle, whether you've read The Fourth Turning or whether you follow astrology and you believe in Pluto and Aquarius, there is absolutely a revolution happening here. And I think it's a apathetic public is becoming more politically astute. And that'll be a snowball that you cannot stop. It's gaining momentum. And I think the outcome is yet to be determined. I'm optimistic. I think we'll start to see a revival of common sense, but it's going to take a while. And I think people underestimate, like we're seeing all this move towards One Nation, and, Pauline's been announced as the preferred PM and she's fundraising. But as you said, 2 years in politics is a lifetime. And I think we're in for a couple more years of genuine, uncomfortable situations in Australia before things turn around. And I think in a weird way, and I don't want anyone to suffer, of course, but I think it's actually the best thing for us.
Well, there's going to be a lot of suffering, unfortunately, over the next few years. We are free falling. Australia has always been a very lucky country. We've had this feeling of having a safety net, which is gone now. We don't really have that. We have been in a bubble, somewhat isolated from some of the other issues that are happening around the world, just because of the way that, we've managed to manage our finances and economies in the past. But all these things have now snowballed into such a way that we are free falling, and there's no quick handbrake to stop this. Even if, let's say, Pauline Hanson becomes PM and One Nation, wins, and there's a coalition and she becomes whatever. Like, let's just imagine this scenario. There's no instant fix to any of these things that are happening right now. This is going to take a decade or more if someone's serious about fixing this. And I'm not saying it can't be done. It can be done. These type of issues can be fixed, especially for a country like Australia that has the resources. Like if we're some poor third world country that doesn't really have any resources or anything of our own, I would say it'd be very hard without getting loans from the IMF or something like this, right? But for Australia, we still have this amazing resource-rich country and this capability as a nation that we can tap into. So there is a possibility that if we just realign a few things and tweak some policies, that we can get back, to being that country that does have a safety net where people aren't worried, where we are, easygoing and laid back and enjoying life. Because I think we've lost a lot of that. You can't just sit back and enjoy life. You're working, you got to work, you're thinking about other jobs, you got your mortgages are going up. I'm going through all this stuff as well. It's really tough, Carlz. I can imagine it's tough because it's never even been this tough for me, and I've always had it pretty easy, right? Most of my life, just because of the way that I've managed to do things. But now it's tough. So I can understand that there's different layers to this. And like you said, you made a great point that even if you're wealthy and you're doing well, you might have a safety net, but that means you might not be entrepreneurial anymore. You might cut back on your businesses. You might decide, I'm just going to start a business overseas. I want to take my assets overseas. Whatever it is, that impacts the rest of the country, and that's what we're seeing right now. Like, there's no appetite in this country for even businesses to, start here, do things. You're taxed to the hilt. Go for it.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say the small business community is coming out. I shouldn't say the small. I don't mean small as in stature. I just mean, private enterprise. But they're coming out swinging. I mean, I've never seen the small business community this unified.
But there's contempt. There's contempt for them as well. Like if you listen to Albanese or Jim Chalmers, they talk about it like it's some sort of grand conspiracy by political elites to on the other side, on the right, that they've gotten together and they put this campaign together, and doesn't really reflect reality. That's the issue. But I see these business people definitely. I mean, there was a business, small business session today that Angus Taylor was a part of, and the guy that was speaking on behalf of the small businesses, like he spoke with a lot of passion. He sounded really angry and pissed off. But is that really getting across to Albanese and Chalmers? I don't think so. I think that they've got a one-track mind, unfortunately.
I don't think it does, because they do have ideological blinkers. It's very evident that these people are a part of the socialist left faction of the Labor Party. But it's worse than that. Albanese is a political activist. He has been his whole life. He's someone who is very enamored with socialist ideology. And that's where they're taking us. I think it's unmistakable at this point. Australia has always been somewhat socialist. We have a lot of socialist policies, but a lot of what he's talking about, redistributing wealth, there's a lot of words that are coming out of his mouth that I'm like, hang on a minute, whoa. Did we read that in a book from Marx, or, talking about
what is it? Generational
inequality. Next thing he'll be talking about the warmth of the collectivism and redistributing private property. And then, hey, guys, we're one step away from Mamdani in New York. But the thing that I think is quite interesting here is, and maybe you can weigh in on this, because, I'm the token Aussie, right? So apparently I have no opinion that's worth listening to. But we are a country of immigrants, right? We have people who have come to Australia for a better life and all that sort of stuff. And they thought Australia was the meal ticket. They're like, yeah, I'm going there. I'm going to escape where I'm leaving and build a better life. And a lot of those immigrants came from places like the Eastern Bloc. They came from places where political corruption was their norm. And they've immigrated here, coming to a Western country to make it for themselves. And now they can already see the writing on the wall. I mean, one of my best mates is Russian, and she's looking around going, are you guys fucking nuts? I've got another friend who's Iranian, and same thing, is looking around going, how are you guys this dumb? Like, we're warning you. And it's interesting because the political left and the progressive left use immigrants as pawns, right? Like, it's electoral votes by appealing to, whether it's the Western Bloc of Sydney with the Lakemba and all that area, and or it's the fresh off the boat migrants from Middle Eastern countries. We'll give them all these platitudes and freebies and be like, yes, vote for us forever. But people who have come here because they genuinely thought Australia was a good option for them are looking at these policies, are looking at the way these politicians are behaving, and they've seen it before. And the Australians, who, for the most part, don't know genuine, their life has been so good, they've had nothing to fear. So they've got no reason to distrust the government, right? But you're importing immigrants that blatantly distrust the government. And when those immigrants are speaking up and saying, guys, this is not good, this is not the road we want to go down, Australians like, shh, immigrant, we know better.
There's some great points there. One thing I will say is that you'll find, Carlz, like, immigrants are very resilient. So they come from really bad conditions. A lot of the kind of new migrants that are coming to Australia, especially from developing countries. So they're very resilient. So some of the things that we're talking about as being tough for us is based on our standard of living. So Australia still looks like a very good country. On paper, we're still up there as a very good country. That's why we win these silly awards like the most livable city in the world and things like this, because on metrics compared to the rest of the world, it still looks pretty good in Australia. So, but what I'm trying to get at is that immigrants are very resilient in the sense that they will deal with really crappy conditions created by governments. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm just saying they'll do that, but they have a support network that we Australians don't have. And I'm putting myself in that category as well, because I see the difference on how immigrant communities are dealing with situations that they're having. They will work together, help each other out. They'll have these networks and communities that we've really lost in this country that we used to have. Maybe we've lost that. They have their networks within their temples and mosques and things like this, and people are looked after. But even if the government fails them, they will somehow ride this out. And on top of all of this, they are actually very privileged in the sense that they get a lot of the handouts and the benefits that Australians don't get when we're going through tough times. Like, I'm going through a tough time. I'm not these things aren't accessible to me because of the way I look. I've grown a very Australian life, so I'm, dependent on myself and my parents, for instance, right? So I have that, which is what most Australians would have, is themselves and their immediate parents. When you look at some of these new immigrant communities, they have a village of people that are able to help them. They have other networks. They have different systems available of finance that they can access. So there is this kind of two-tier approach that goes in the way that people are treated in this country. And I think the brunt of the people that are suffering this, really, that are seeing the downturns and seeing their standard of living being erased, is actually Australians. Whether it's multi-generational Australians or people that have, very much grown up as Australian, they're the ones that are really seeing this problem, because they're the ones that were saving up for a house. Okay, we're going to go stay with mom and dad and save, 100K and then try to put a deposit down and buy a house. Well, they're finding that you can't really do that in this market. It doesn't work that way. The homes that their parents bought, for a couple of $100,000, it's like $2.something million now. And it's not reachable anymore in their lifetime. Like they've lost that ability to do that. So the immigrants aren't seeing it in that way. Is how I'm trying to put it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's something that you just said, something that made me feel actually really sad, because I've seen a lot of this. Where I live, there's a lot of enclaves being built, right? Whether it's a temple or a mosque or whatever, these are community centers for people with shared religious beliefs or ethnic community organizational places. And I can't name a single Australian one, right? Like that's the crazy thing. Like we're in Australia, and I don't have an issue with people practicing their religion. That's fine. But where is it your average Aussie now goes to hang out with their community? Like you just don't see it anymore. And Topher and I have talked about this at length before, but I grew up in the Australia where we were in a cul-de-sac, and all the kids in that cul-de-sac would jump on our bikes or our rollerblades, and we'd hang out together, and our parents would be out the front having a cup of tea or drinking a beer, and everyone at least knew their neighbors. And I'm not saying it was like a kumbaya thing. It wasn't like Pleasantville. But there was an extension of your local area. And Topher talks about the third space a lot, right? Like you've got home, you've got work. What's that third space that you organize in or that you go to? And for Aussies, I think they used to be like, your surf club, your pub, or it could be like your local sporting organization. It might have been the footy netball associations. And a lot of that's drying up, not so much the sports stuff, but as far as like, your local watering hole or institutions where you would go and hang out, like RSLs and whatever, they're not really a thing anymore. And so I think this creates animosity between Aussies because, we're not talking to each other, we're not exchanging ideas. And then you add to that the isolation of COVID. And now, of course, a lot of people work from home. So, there's no longer that around the water cooler moment, or like, everyone's in the staff room together having a yarn. And if they are, and if they do, it's always like, who do you vote for? I can't align myself with you. And I see this in my comments. I'll put something up on Instagram and people are like, wait, hang on, do you support Israel? I can't associate with you. I'm like, what? I was talking about fashion, it's just one of those things. And you're right. The migrants aren't behaving that way. They're very much protecting their own and hanging out in their enclaves. And I really, I'm sad for Australia in that sense.
Yeah, it sucks. And, I sense it as well. I remember growing up, this is not a new thing per se, but even when I was growing up, a lot of the people that were really friendly were the, Aussie neighbors, the white neighbors. They were, out to, they wanted to know who you were. They wanted to talk to you. And I had friends and stuff, and we would do stuff. But as more and more migrant communities kind of took over these places, and then the migrants themselves are suspicious of each other, right? So you got to understand that when we're talking about migrants, we're not talking about them as one block. They are also internally suspicious of each other. Yeah. So I live in an apartment, for instance, and I'm in the city. There's lots of students and Chinese students and things like this. I think they're very suspicious of me just because I'm, looking like a, what I mean? They don't necessarily see me as Australian. They see me as an Indian, right? And they're just very suspicious. Like very few of them will actually talk. But if like a, Aussie lady gets into the lift, they will say hello or good morning. Like that's what I'm used to as well, having grown up here, is to interact with people. So just in that small space in an apartment, I see that there's all these people living. This is like a 12-story apartment. All these people living. I hardly know who the people next door to me are because even in a small confined space, because people don't want to interact. They don't want to talk. And then you extend that out into the rest of the community. It is a problem. We don't have that community spirit. We don't have these things that unify us. Recently, we're being unified over things like sport and things like this. These kind of big moment things happen, but not at the small scale. And I think that makes a weaker society. And it makes a fragmented society that usually institutions and governments take advantage of to push things through. That is so why. That's why it's so easy to get people to turn on each other, because everyone's like not for each other, they're for like themselves. and they're pitted against everyone else. And this is the problem that we're having in a country. Like when you change it so much demographically in a way where people aren't really assimilating or integrating in any way, it's problematic. So I wouldn't really say it's problematic. Let's say there's an enclave. It's like I grew up. I used to go to Springvale all the time when I was a young kid, growing up in Dandenong, and Springvale is pretty much all like Asian, Chinese, and Vietnamese. And you went there knowing that it was that, but like it wasn't like you weren't welcome there. It was like a different experience. Like in small bits and pieces. I think those things are okay. Most countries have like a Chinatown. It's like kind of like a cool thing, because that's where, like, when traditionally when Chinese immigrants came to a country, whether it's in America or Australia, they'd kind of set up in an area and they'd have their shops and their cuisine, and you kind of enjoy those things. But that's not what we have now today, Carlz. We have whole towns where everything is being taken over, and there's certain areas that you might even feel unsafe going to, because everyone kind of looks at you funny. They're not friendly, in the same Australian spirit. They're just looking at you like, what are you doing here? You're not meant to be here. Like, you know what I mean? And that's the problem. I'm not saying every culture does that, but there are certain cultures and groups that engage in this type of tribalistic behavior. And they're very much like, we own the streets now. And I think that is very problematic.
And I think we're seeing this sort of, identity politics has come down to the point where, we look at each other with such cynicism and also suspicion now, like, who are you? Who are you aligned with? I don't trust you. And I think, when you have a low trust society, that's also, spurred on by the rising crime and the lack of consequence for that crime. And then there's all these other bits and pieces. I mean, not to conflate too many issues, but or to take away from the severity of these topics. But, in Victoria, for example, we have a youth crime crisis. And unfortunately, a high percentage of them happen to be of an ethnic minority. And the problem is, when you've got these kids that look a certain way, the rhetoric gets set. Oh, it's the migrants, right? So then, we tar everyone with the same brush. And then you add that and it becomes a wildfire, because overseas there's other issues that could be race-based, right? We've seen Kamalo Anthony, did I get his name right? And then you've seen what's happened in Belfast, and then you've seen what's happened with Henry Nowak, right? It's sort of like people, and then it starts to catastrophize in people's minds, and they go, oh my God, it's all migrants, it's all things. And, the problem is, and this is my argument, is that in their failure to do any action or any consequences because they don't want to be seen as racist, they're actually breeding genuine racism, right? By failing to actually arrest the kids that have done the youth crime and put them in jail and give them harsh consequences, and then allowing other kids to have that social contagion to want to participate in it. And then across the pond, same thing, in their dire desperation to not being seen as racist, they didn't persecute the Pakistani rape gangs. They haven't cracked down on knife crime. And now we've had, almost a beheading in Belfast, for Christ's sakes. Like, people start to go, well, it's us versus them. And I mean, America's way further down the road than us. And they've naturally got quite hostile race relations anyway because of their history. But what's interesting, watching a lot of the rhetoric come out of the US around that Kamalo Anthony case, we've got Black people who are in Congress, like Jasmine Crockett, right, saying like, he didn't do murder, he was defending himself. I'm like, mate, a 17-year-old kid stabbed a man in the heart. Like, if we can't call a spade, I think this identity politics has taken away, it's removed all common sense, and it's making people insanely emotional and reactive, so that we don't actually solve the problem. The problem is that crime is not being dealt with proportionately. We have a two-tier justice system. Like, they're our issues, but instead we're over here debating whether or not your skin color is the identifying reason as to why you're problematic. Like, it's just ridiculous. And I think this is the left. This is what the left have tried to create. It creates chaos, because all of a sudden everyone cares about immutable traits. It's the same reason why, like, we're arguing about whether a man can get pregnant, whether a man can be a woman, because now we don't know what a woman is. Like, we're spending time arguing stupid shit like this and not dealing with the actual consequences, which is like the rampant rise in pedophilia. Like, no one wants to have that conversation. And so I think, you know, when you see One Nation rising in the polls, that's the downstream effect. When people are so outraged, they're like, no one's speaking common sense. Like you've got Anthony Albanese saying, "Oh, I don't want to enter culture wars by talking about what a woman is, for God's sakes." And then at the same time, you've got Jacinta Allen saying that, you know, she's got the toughest bail laws in the country, but at the same time, youth crimes through the roof, and there's one kid who happens to be Sudanese who's got over 400 been bailed 400 times. People just go, enough. And it's not a protest vote, it's a abandonment of the system as it exists. That's what I genuinely think it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the identity politics doesn't really help. It's muddying the waters a lot, even for the right. Traditionally, the right has avoided identity politics, and the left is really pushing them down this trajectory. And I think it's being done on purpose, because once you make everything about identity politics, the side that does really well in that debate is the left. They would love nothing more than to distill these issues down to identity, ethnicity, and race. This is where they, you know, really excel in terms of creating political turmoil for their opponents, and issues around, you know, sensitivities around what we can discuss. Now, there is a lot of pushback against this, and I understand people's frustrations as well when it comes to these topics. Obviously, like, we need to discuss race. So a lot of these like little gangbangers running around Melbourne, they're African youths. Just a week or so ago, my dad was jumped by these guys and robbed in Dandenong. Yeah, and like, you know, stabbed in the face with scissors. Not in a damaging manner. Like he was thankfully okay, but even he was like, "What the hell's going on?" And we grew up in, you know, Dandenong. It's a pretty rough part of the country, and I'm just saying, it's like everywhere now, and it's very obvious like what these things are. Like people can see, like we can see with our eyes that it's a youth crime. A lot of the people that are robbing the houses are these African kids. Now, again, nothing bad. As I've met really lovely African Australian people, and you're seeing even right now in the soccer, you're seeing these guys who have African heritage. They're kicking goals for Socceroos and all these kind of things. It's great. Like this is all good things. But the problem is we do have this youth crime issue, and these groups are predominantly represented as being the ones who are causing the damage. So how do we as a society now deal with them? And I think the first act for politicians is actually recognize that it's these groups, these people, and it's got to be specific to these communities. Like it's got to be called out. It's got to be done. They've been avoiding it for years. They tiptoe around it. It's just got to be done. And sometimes you got to make people feel uncomfortable. Like, you know, these. You can't have communities avoid accountability. I think that's one of the things that we see a lot of in migrant communities. They try to avoid, like they try to disown the people. You know, if there's an Islamic terrorist, they'll be like, well, he wasn't a Muslim.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you look into the details and he was being radicalized at a mosque in Australia. So like that's a problem. Why are Muslim Australians being radicalized in mosques in Australia? Like I get it if they went overseas to some Taliban training camp, got radicalized there. But if they're getting radicalized in home, I'm talking about the Bondi killer here, the guy that was born in Australia. He got radicalized here. That's an issue for us. Like, why the hell did that happen? Should there be constraints on certain? Sorry?
We sent more people to ISIS than any other Western country.
I mean, obviously there's an issue, right? So we're discussing ISIS brides in this country. Like we have an issue with homegrown terrorism and the susceptibility of people that have grown up in this nation to accept terroristic causes. So that you can do two things around that. You can either, you know, put some restrictions on religious freedoms, because a lot of these the indoctrination is happening in religious centers for this, and that's been shown, that's documented. Or, you know, the smart, sensible thing to do, I think that makes sense, is say, okay, you know what? Right now, we're going to cut immigration from these particular nations and these countries, because over time, yes, the people that are here, they're great. They're Australian. They're going to be a part of this community. But going down into the future, for 10 years, we're not going to immigrate people from this part of the world. And that will perhaps modify behavior of the people that are here, because I think that's we got to be more like that, rather than just be like, oh well, you know, like it's just he's not one of them. You know, that doesn't work anymore.
Well, what's terrifying is we had Tony Burke coming out saying he doesn't want these people to assimilate, and then you've had Albo in the same breath also say that you'll never hear him saying that migrants are different to Australians, or I can't remember the exact quote. And you hear that and you're like, but hang on a minute, why would you come here? If Australia is not a better country, why on earth would you migrate here? Of course it's a better country. That's why people want to come here. It's not racist to say that. It's not neo-Nazi of me to say that Australia is arguably a better country to migrate to. But, when you hear our leaders, Tony Burke and Albo, speaking about this with contempt for Australians, you just sort of go, who's actually voicing things for Australians, right? Like who, and arguably Pauline Hanson is the only one.
They don't care. Like Albo, Tony Burke, they don't care, right? They're thinking short term. They're thinking elections. They're thinking, okay, what can we say not to make this part of the community angry because they might take their vote elsewhere to the Greens or whichever side supporting terrorism the most. I'm just saying in general. I'm not casting aspersions on particular groups, but like they just don't want to do it because they're like, the ramifications for them, not for the country, but for them, what it means to them electorally is more important than what it means to the future of Australia. And that's what we're up against that's what we're up against as Australians. Now, Pauline Hanson, for 30 years, you look at her maiden speech, she's been saying the same exact thing around this issue. And even Albanese and Tony Burke, they've had to come to the realization that some of this is actually true, but they're unwilling to give up the political power that they get from having these migrant voters who are not really the fact that they talk about they don't want them to assimilate, because what does assimilation mean? Assimilation means you create migrants like me who are aware of the politics, who understand the ramifications of the budget, the economy, who understand what immigration policies does to a country, right? Assimilation means you get more of me. They don't want more of me. They want apathetic immigrants that are just here, doing whatever they want to do, in their enclaves, have your own religious groups, do all this stuff, whatever. We don't really care what you do. Just vote for us.
Yeah.
And they think they can manage. They believe that they can manage this, Carly. They think they can manage this. But the truth is, they are importing cultures into this country who are managing them. They are dominant cultures, religiously or as a nation, whatever it is. There's certain dominances that these cultures have, and they are not playing by the same rules as we are. They will institute their particular worldview and push more of that into our culture here. And that is what you got to do. That's why people are burning stuff in Belfast and rioting. That is why, because those groups have been given this same kind of blank slate, do whatever you want in this country as long as you vote for us. And this is kind of what they've done. And we don't want that. We're at a point where we can maybe manage that. And lucky, there are politicians in this country like Pauline Hanson who are addressing these issues. Now, I don't know if we can make a massive dent into this, but at least the conversation's happening. And at least there can be some meaningful addressing of this particular issue.
Well, the thing I'm grateful for, and I don't mean this to talk poorly about the UK situation, but, we're lucky that we're nowhere near down the road like what's happening in South Africa or the UK. And we see things like, the fact that we're talking about, in 2026, a beheading on a street in Belfast. I just, it's unconscionable, right? Like this shouldn't be happening. I mean, the equivalent that we have right here at the moment is carjackings. Carjackings are a third world import. 15 years ago, you didn't hear about regular carjackings, particularly at knife point. That's now a norm. It's so common. I think there's like 10 carjackings a day at knife point or machete point, right? And so, you talk about the disdain that our politicians have, but also, for them, it's just about the political game. Of course, they're just trying to secure the next election. But I think all these issues are starting to come together, right? You've got Australians who are doing it tough economically. You've got politicians who don't seem to care about social cohesion. They'll tell you they do, but evidently they don't. Because, I mean, as a Victorian, or as two Victorians, for the last 18 months, Jacinta Allen keeps promising toughest bail laws. We're going to be the toughest in the country. And yet, literally the other day, we had a young girl. I can't remember the legal term for it, but she was basically ruled too young to know consequences, like right from wrong. And this is someone who had enough maturity to be able to Google what happens if you try to run someone over and what are the consequences. But, so people are hearing one thing from our politicians, seeing a whole other thing with their own eyeballs. And that is just sending people into this loop of like, am I living in is this the Truman Show? Is everyone just like watching me? Like, this is crazy. Am I the crazy one?
And everyone that I talk to, I don't know about you, but I don't bring up politics. I find people volunteer the information to me, even if they don't know who I am. Oh, you got to be really careful at the moment. Like, oh, it's rough out there at the moment, or, things are really tough. People making these comments, and then if you engage in the conversation, everyone's volunteering the same information. Like, this is not the Australia that we know or love. This is not why we came here. I've got Iranian friends who are like, I don't understand what Australia is doing. Like, we can show you this happening right now in Iran, and you're importing the problem. Like, what? And the interesting thing is, again, I mentioned before about how, like, we've got migrants here speaking up about these issues, and of course you've got the progressive Aussies going, shush. No, we want migrants, but don't say things that don't agree with us in our political echo chamber. And I think that's why you're seeing things like this. I'm going to bring up a story. This broke today. It's this is from The Shovel, right? This is like satire. But immediately after the Socceroos winning, to be honest, I didn't watch this. I don't actually know what I'm talking about. I hear that they won by 2 goals or something. I don't know.
2 goals. Whatever. I mean, they're a very good performance. I watched the soccer afterwards, but yeah, it's very good.
Excellent. So I know nothing about soccer. I'm just going to volunteer that now. But immediately after, apparently he's an African migrant, kicked our winning goal or something like that. And the left cannot help themselves without being able to enjoy this for just a moment. Collectively as a country, as Australians, the Socceroos won, yay team. Immediately it was politicized. Immediately the rhetoric was set that One Nation supporters would be were deporting these people. And like, did a One Nation person actually say that, or is that your projection? And so people see stuff like this and they're like, I don't want that. That's not what I said. And if anything, the left and the people who are publishing these pieces, they're actually helping One Nation. And we can see that because I'm going to bring up another thing, which everyone's probably been paying attention to, is this. This is proof. Wow. This is where we're at. Wow. One Nation, it's not even been a week, right? This went live Thursday, I think.
So I think it's been 4 days. It's pretty historic.
$4.1 million raised by the people. This is not, I mean, I'm sure there's a couple of big donations in there, but this is your average Joes. Like, I contributed to this. I was like, fuck yeah, I'll put my money where my mouth is. It's one thing to, Nate's just said 5 days. Nate's our resident One Nation employee here. And also, I've got to do this slide. Hang on. Nate.
Thank you.
Sent me a gift. I have a Pauline Hanson bobblehead. So thank you, Nate. My little Pauline.
Nate. I've got to get Nate watching me on my channels.
Yeah, Nate, don't you leave. It's ours. But, talking about this, again, I talk about the contempt from Albo, right? Like, when he was asked a question about it, he's like, did they though? Did they?
They're so funny, yeah.
It's such a juvenile reaction, right? Like, you hear that and you go, this is such a bratty reaction. As a prime minister of the country, surely he would have gone, oh, well, okay, that's something we'll have to look at. Like, just something. Yeah. But instead he has to go, did they? Did they really?
He was a bit rattled. They've all become a bit rattled by this fundraiser. The Liberals are obviously trying to avoid the whole thing, and Angus Taylor's trying to be like, oh, well, I'm really focused on the issues as opposition leader at the moment. They're all rattled, and it shows you that, one, like, it's historic in the terms that it's been done in this era. And what I saw, Carly, was a lot of people commenting, because I was talking about this issue a couple of days ago as well. People saying this is the first time they've made a political donation to a political party, like in this manner. And I think there's a lot of first-time people doing this and getting behind, a political party in this way, and it's very powerful.
Yeah.
Labour, Liberal, they spend millions of dollars on workshops and study groups and advertisers and marketers trying to figure out how to connect with the Australian people. And Pauline Hanson's managed to do it in this kind of guerrilla way. Right. And even this marketing that she's doing, like Fire the Liar, it's getting people enthusiastic about the prospect of supporting a political party for the first time, like One Nation, putting their money as well into it, even small amounts. It doesn't matter. The amount doesn't matter. At the same time, challenging the status quo. I think that's the main thing. I think people want to see Anthony Albanese squirm.
Yeah.
They want to see him uncomfortable. I think people get delight from that. And I know that doesn't really change much in our lives right now, but it does, make me smile. At least it gives, with all the disasters that we're going through, it gives me a little bit of, peace in my heart when I see the political class squirming. And I think many Australians are like, just give it to them. It's that attitude that we have, put it into their faces, shove it up them type thing. And
this is
it's working for Hanson.
This is the Streisand effect, right? Like Albo's just learned a very valuable lesson. When you try and squash something or quell it, all of a sudden, boom, everyone's like, I'll give money. Like same thing as me. Same thing that you said. A girlfriend of mine who's not political in the slightest was like, oh, I gave money to One Nation today. I was like, what? And she said, yeah.
Exactly.
He's like, fuck that guy. Fuck Albo.
Yeah.
Like, screw you,
But her donation as a political thing that we can discuss, her donation means a lot more than the person that's regularly involved in politics. The fact that people that aren't really engaged and doing something like this and giving money to a political party like this for an advertising campaign is massive. It's almost unheard of in Australia in this manner. So it is a seismic shift that we're seeing right now, at least.
I wanted to bring this up. So Pauline posted this on her X. This is the heat map of where the donations are coming from. So, of course, it'll be like, oh, it's all the rednecks. It's all the uneducated ones, because that's the only thing the left that have. So looking at this map of Australia here, obviously high concentration in the capital cities, but I want to bring your attention to Melbourne, right? This is the woke state of us all. Like, this is socialist bloody stronghold. Let's look at this Victorian map. That's crazy. Look at that. I can't zoom in any more than that. I don't know, Nate. If Nate in the chat, if you've got better map for me to look at, let me know. But this tells you where people are at. It's not. I mean, obviously there's a high percentage of regional there, but look at the concentration, not just in the traditional conservative enclaves down the peninsula. Like, we're looking in the north there. Look at the west.
Yep.
There's a high concentration there. So, and Nate's just said here, how many times have I said that Victorians are hungry for change? You're right. And I don't think any pollster right now could have predicted this. I mean, your average poll is, a sample size of about 1,100 to 2,000 people.
That's right.
This is your poll. This right here, I mean, it was almost just shy of 62,000 people who have contributed. That's contributed financially. Like, that's an extra step. That's one extra step than rocking up at the polls under obligation to vote. So the fact people are willing to put their money, and you probably saw the same post, but it was a man who had put up, pardon me, that his family usually does fish and chips on a Friday night. And instead of doing, they're not very wealthy, but instead of doing fish and chips that Friday night, they donated that money to One Nation instead. And again, like you said, completely unheard of. This is seismic. And I think, we alluded to before that we're still got a couple more very tough years. This is only going to grow. This isn't going to lose momentum. I think it's only going to gain momentum. I think we'll see some plateaus, particularly as things start to sort of quiet down. But next time there's a political issue,
Yeah, there's going to be ebbs and flows, but what we have to contend with, well, not we, but the political class have to contend with now is that One Nation and Pauline Hanson is very much in the conversation. This is not a minor party that you go to for a controversial take. This is a party now that you have to take seriously. And Pauline Hanson, if you look at the numbers where she's showing up in the polls right now as the preferred prime minister, people in the country, at least the average everyday voter that's taking part in these polls, see her as a viable prime minister, more than Albanese and definitely more than Angus Taylor. So, the media, it changes the dynamics of everything. Like, you have to refer to what the views of One Nation are, and they are doing that. And again, it's so hard for a minor party to get that in Australia. Like, it's always been this uniparty. They've given preferential treatment in the media because they're so left-wing to the Greens for a long time and to the Teals. But you've seen them. They've always avoided One Nation. They've always avoided minor conservative parties. They've only ever gone to those issues for scandals and, to use them as a punching bag almost on certain issues. But now people want to know what Pauline Hanson's, view is on this tax or this economic policy, and that changes things. And I think that's why, even though it's still the federal election is 2 years away, they will continue to be a part of the conversation. I think that's really important for a party like One Nation to be a part of that conversation. And it also creates the possibility that more Australians will be like, you know what, I'm going to give One Nation a go. And I think that's what terrifies them even more, because people who are fence might be like, you know what, this time I'm going to give my vote to One Nation. And yes, they haven't been in power. This because one of the arguments against One Nation that the political elite like to make is that, well, they don't have any experience. Who's going to be this minister? Who's going to be the finance minister? Who's going to be the defense minister? What are they going to do, right? That's the argument they make. But I think Australians are willing to be like, I'm going to give them a go, because that's what we do in this country. We're going to give them a go. We're sick of the political class that exists right now. And yeah, they'll figure it out. And we just want to give them a go. And I think that might push even more people towards One Nation. So if Pauline Hanson and One Nation can get their things to, there's still a lot they have to do, Carlz. Like, even in Victoria, they have to get their infrastructure together. And again, I don't hold anything against them and blame them for stuff. Like, this is all, even for them, it looks like this is all just happened. You know what I mean? They're dealing with it as well, like the rest of us.
When Topher and I chatted to Pauline, she said that, she said the issue with growth like this, and I think people underestimate, is that, they don't have the support networks that Labor and Liberal have. Her party's been around 30 years, but they haven't had a branch in every state. They haven't got all this manpower. And I mean, Albanese also restricted her ability to have political advisors. For someone who's sitting on over a third of the vote, she only has 2 political advisors. Anthony Albanese has 17. So, it's hard for One Nation. I mean, I'm sure Nate can attest to this in the chat. It's hard for them to scramble. They're trying. But, I think that's also why so many Aussies are willing to financially vote as well, because they're like, hey, man, I'm willing to help. I'll throw my hat in the ring. Let me see, I can give you money. And something that Topher and I always talk about is that it's one thing to voice your opinion, and it's great. We need more people doing it. But it's a whole other thing to show up either with money or time. And, if anyone in the chat's interested in helping out One Nation, I'm sure they could have some extra hands at a local branch. This is where I think you'll start to see
throw your hat in the ring. Definitely. Throw your hat in the ring. Like, make this next upcoming federal election like so tough for the Liberals and the Labor, because they have that infrastructure. Put the people power behind a party like One Nation. And get involved. Like, that will really make a massive difference as well, for sure, Carl. I definitely agree with you. So
we've got I think a leak here of the first Fire the Liar. So let's have a look.
Let's fire it up.
Always been a man of my word.
Well, we have no plans to change negative gearing.
Well, we've changed our position.
I stepped back one step. I didn't fall off the stage. The reception was incredibly positive, and not a single person heckled. Reducing power prices by $275.
That's a full-out lie.
My word is my bond.
That's pretty good.
That's it's quick and simple. And we've seen Labor do this over and over to Liberal leaders during elections times, and now it's being done to Anthony Albanese in a even more effective way than I've seen the Liberals do, by Pauline Hanson.
He does not like it. And I think the problem with Conservatives, and I'm kind of throwing myself in that as well, is that when you're running a business, when you have things going for you in your life, and you said this before as well, like, your life's been mostly good, you're not necessarily paying a lot of attention to politics, because your focus is over there. Like, if you've got a thriving business, or you're really into your career, you're not really taking time out to spend your day on X scrolling and looking at political ads. Now people are. That's the problem. Because a lot of small business owners are looking around going, well, like, this is not okay. We've de-incentivized people from having a small business. And you've got mum and dads who are sitting there at home going, why is my child all of a sudden transgender? Where is this coming from? Like, all of these issues are all sort of happening at the same time. And I think come 2028, when our next federal election is, there's going to be a very different Australian public that shows up to the polls. But the first test is definitely here in Victoria. And I think no one, I'm putting words in everyone's mouth, but I don't think anyone has suffered as much as Victoria. So, like, you know, I think we're champing at the bit. What do you reckon?
Look, Victoria's a pretty tough state. It's going to be One Nation. I think they'll do well, but I don't see them, for instance, be in the government in Victoria. Like it's a very different dynamics in the state. But One Nation plus the Liberals, when they get their head around all of this and come on board with this, as a coalition perhaps, or preference flows, things like this can maybe give Labor a bit of a hard time. You have to understand that this state, there's a lot of these kind of communist type socialist individuals all over the state. There's very heavy populations of migrant populations, which Labor have really worked on for decades, who are very loyal. It's going to be very hard to get them switched over. So, Labor do have I still think that, I don't know if it's going to be Jacinta Allen, but I still think that Labor could just sneak in Victoria still. It would really come down to the ground game that the Liberals and One Nation can, if they can work together and do something, there's a chance that there could be something that happens in Victoria. Labor's still very strong here. It sounds weird, but after everything we saw during the COVID years, Daniel Andrews romped it in. This state is weird. The people like to suffer. They like to suffer. They're very loyal to Labor for whatever reason. And it's just whether Victorians will smarten up. And let's see.
I think it's interesting, Victoria, you're right, because Victorians like to think they're the more sophisticated older brother or older sister of Sydney, right? Like Sydney's the showy, flashy, showbody state. And then you've got Melbourne, which is the more cultured area. But when you go into the city these days, the Melbourne that my first job was in the CBD, and I don't even recognize it now. I don't even know what any of the shops are. I don't know where any of the good coffee is anymore. Like, it's not Melbourne as I remember it at all. And I think you'll find that a lot of people are sort of, maybe they can't pinpoint it, right? And also a lot of this is cognitive dissonance. People don't want to reconcile with the fact that they've been on the wrong side.
Yes.
I've said this before, but so many people still genuinely believe that Daniel Andrews saved lives. So just beating that dead horse about Daniel Andrews, you're never going to change those people's mind. They genuinely think he did a good job. So that's no longer that's not the sticking point that people think it is. It's the 15 billion to the CFMEU that seems to have really hit home for a few people, and youth crime, and also the decay in our civic areas, right? Like Jacinta Allen came out, I think, about 2 months ago now, declaring that there was going to be $1 billion spent upgrading all our highways and taking care of those state-owned roads. And all that was just reallocated funds. It wasn't extra funds. It was just like, oh, we're just going to move that around here. And we actually already had that available. And nothing's going to change. But I had a chat with someone at the supermarket the other day. There's like a glass sliding door to enter the corridor to get into the supermarket. And the glass has been shattered for about a year, as long as I've lived here. And I walk past it every week, and I'm just like, why won't someone fix that? Now, obviously, that's not a state government issue. It's just more so the apathy of the decay in the local areas. And when you have all of those things compounding, I mean, you thankfully have never been subjected to me talking about chicken in the noodle aisle, which is the book I'm writing. But this is something I talk about, civic decay, and the broken windows theory is well established. Having a look around Melbourne now, the graffiti, the overgrowth, the rubbish, broken windows, abandoned cars. You live down sort of my area. If you go through some of the back roads, you see weeds coming out of pavement that's almost a metre high. There was a what I called the Christmas tree coming out of one of the footpaths. It's gone now, and I think the only thing that got rid of that tree was the fact that someone put Christmas lights on it. Like the council went, that's 1 minute too far. But it was, I think, God, it would be over a year ago now. There was a burnout car on the corner of Greens Road and Springvale Road. And I did a reel about it, right? And I said it was the great Aussie tradition of not my job, mate, because the council worker had come past to mow the grass around the car, and the car had been sitting there literally on the corner of the road for over 8 weeks. And then I made this reel. It went viral, and then sure enough, when you embarrass the council, they do something. It was gone the next business day. But I think people are noticing that now, right? Like everything just looks old. Everything looks fatigued. Everything looks like shit. And, you know, you think about people who take pride in their front yard. You know, they're mowing their lawns, making things look good. If you have a really nice street and then those damn renters move in that don't mow their lawns and the rubbish pile is piling up in the front lawn, people get offended by that. That's Australia now. Most people have been taking care of their bits, but the state government is the renter. They're the people who aren't taking care of things. And I actually think that bothers Victorians more than we realise. I don't think people necessarily articulate it as much on socials. But when you talk to people, they're like, what's happening here? This looks like shit.
Yep.
Our roads are full of potholes. There's trees coming out of the pavement. For a state that prides themselves on being the cultural precinct, it doesn't look very cultural right now, you know?
No, it doesn't. It's very kind of dumpy. The city is alive though, like it is alive, but it doesn't feel like Melbourne. It feels like a more, you know, some city in like Malaysia or Singapore, something like this. Yeah, like it's a weird kind of cosmopolitan, you know, Australasian type thing that's happening. We can have another whole discussion on that, but there is that going on as well, and a lot of the businesses have changed over, and you know these things, of course, happen in different generations, and there's changes that take place. But what you identified, this decay, it's almost being, you know, for certain, you know, Melburnians or Victorians, it's almost like a feature of the city. Like this decay is a part of who we are now. You know, that's why, like you said, that if that window or whatever, that door is smashed, maybe they're thinking like, I can fix it, but it'll get smashed again. So let's just leave it broken. Yeah. I found myself thinking about this in certain instances when I was having a business. It's like, you know, when people were graffitiing around the business, I was just like, well, I can clean it or just leave it. If I leave it, you know, they're going to do it again. And no one really seems to care. It's like, it's just what's happening, you know, like you're just kind of stuck with this thing. So that takes a massive shift in attitudes. And you're right. People do notice it, but it takes a massive shift in attitudes to move away from accepting that as the normal thing and some sort of cool vibe. Like, you know, Melbourne's always been this kind of dingy type. They've had these dingy type areas, which, you know, like Brunswick, for instance. I had an office in on Brunswick Street in Fitzroy or whatever. Why? Yeah, and like I had an office there above a clothing store. We had our photography studio, and you know, I'd come downstairs, and you know, we got used to having junkies out the back just shooting up because it was just like you just kind of they're there. It's their turf. It's their territory. So if you're cool with them, you know, they weren't trying to break into your business. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have to make these. You have to work within the system in Melbourne, and I think we've accepted that for a long time. But now it's gotten so bad that it's impacting, you know, much more than just an inconvenience. Yeah, it's impacting everything around our living standards, and you know, it will take a massive effort, I think, to change that for sure.
I think you just touched on something there about the decline in our living standards. I mean, that's also known quite well now. Like in the OECD countries, we've declined the most significantly. And yet over on the other side of the world, South America right now, is most countries have just had a massive swing to the right wing. You know, this is like a socialist stronghold. You know, you got places like Bolivia where the communists are now rioting because the conservatives won. You know, you got Milei, you've got Bukele, and is it Colombia? I think is destined to go conservative. So right now, people who are literally living the decay and the depravity and the sadness of socialism, and I mean that in every sense of the word. Like when I say depravity, like El Salvador 5 years ago was the homicide capital of the world. Colombia is one of the biggest gang and cartel manufacturing countries on the planet. You know, like all of these places are touched by socialist politics, and all of a sudden their communities are demanding change, and they're voting for the people to fix it up. Venezuela is, thanks to Trump, Venezuela is now starting to see a shift in their living standards. What was once an incredibly wealthy country, and yet in the West, whether it's the UK, Australia, Canada, we're seeing a decline in our living standards. And it's been normalized that it's not just crime, it's not just petty theft like shoplifting, it's carjackings. And now, thanks to what's happened to Henry and the poor man in Belfast, it's beheadings, it's stabbings. Like, that's not the West. That's not the world that we know. And, rape gangs, things like this, we're being told this is normal. This is just life in the big city. And I don't think people believe that. The governments might sit there and try and normalize it. But I look at someone like Keir Starmer, right? And Keir Starmer coming out and saying, like, every time something happens, it's the racists, it's the far right. That's the reason and the causation for it. Albo did it around Bondi. It wasn't Islamic terrorism. It was the rise of the right wing as the threat to Australia. And when you keep telling people that, again, it's a Streisand effect. I think it's pushing more and more people to become ultra conservative. Maybe they're not going to completely abandon some of their more socialist ideas. So I don't think you'll see many people who start to vote conservative want to get rid of Medicare, for example, or people who want to see like the NDIS abolished. I don't think we'll see that. And certainly abortion's not a topic, I don't think, on anyone's list. But when it comes to safety and economic prosperity, I think a lot of Australians are going to go, nah, done. I'm out. I'm going this way. Yeah. And so it'll be really interesting to see, not just in the next couple of years, but in 10 years, we've got a whole generation that's maturing through this crisis, Gen Alpha, right? Gen Z, as we know, predominantly the women lean more socialist, particularly young women. They're very progressive. Young men are now leaning towards more conservative values. But this generation Alpha, who's lived among this, who knows only this, I think we're going to see one of the most conservative generations since World War I. And I think what you're going to see is Australia in 10 years, with that voting bloc being added in, is going to be a very different country. What do you think?
You're more hopeful than me. You're more hopeful than me.
Yeah,
for sure.
You don't think it's happening?
No, I don't have that much faith in the younger generation. I think there is a bit of hope there that they will become a certain way based on what they're going through. But I don't know. I don't see. Maybe the boys maybe a little bit go a bit more towards the right, but I don't think so. I don't think so like that. I think the problem is, we still have this society where it's very much this TikTok culture, the celebrity culture. These things are very much still impacting the youth. They haven't really moved too much away from that. There are just pockets of that people get excited about, but they're very much controlled. And we are seeing this push by governments. The UK is just imposing their social media ban as well. Yeah. Canada's doing the same thing. So they are also interested in young minds and indoctrinating them at a younger age without access to the other stuff, which kind of contradicts what I'm saying right now. But those two things, I think, I don't see the younger generation being where the impact happens. I personally believe, this is my personal belief, is changing the minds of migrant Australians will have a massive impact if it can be done. Okay. We're lucky in Australia. We have a lot of entrepreneurial, Chinese migrant communities. We have a lot of even the Indian migrant communities. They're basically conservatives. Like, everything they believe in is conservative values. It's just they've been tricked into voting for Labor for so long that's what they do. Yeah. So if we can move some of these populations over to be a bit more towards the conservative side and take more interest in, because these impact their businesses. A lot of these migrant communities would be looking at the Liberals now because, they have multiple properties. They do invest. They want to build business. So you got to get those people on side a little bit sooner than later, because those populations are also growing. They're having more children. Yeah. They're having bigger families. Those kids are also, they usually tend to go with their parents, or they get swayed by racial politics and things like this. Like, that's still a massive power, I believe, that the left has with their progressive ideas is these migrant voting blocks that they've built and demographics. I don't think the kids alone can change that, because you got to understand those kids that are growing up in Australia as well. They're not just white kids.
Yeah.
And that's where I see change potentially happening. If you can take away the power that migrants give to these left-wing parties, whether it's in Australia or the UK, if you can take that away from them and make that more of a level playing field. I'm not saying they'll all vote for Labor. I'm sorry, for the Liberals or for One Nation. But if you can just get enough across that you can, slowly start to make changes in a nation, I think that's important. And it sucks that it's like that. We shouldn't be beholden to people with maybe foreign interests, but unfortunately, you have to play the game. And I think like right now, we're not really playing the game. We're pushing people away. We're pushing these communities towards Labor even more.
Yeah.
I'm happy that Pauline Hanson is actually not doing that. She's not engaging in that whatsoever. She's actually trying to cut across the line and have a more of a broader base. And even the recent statistics that we're seeing coming out of the polls shows that a lot more foreign-born or migrant Australians are voting or intend to vote for One Nation. So I think that's where the changes can happen.
Yeah.
I don't think the kids are saving us. I'm sorry. I just don't think so.
So this is why I say that, right? And this is someone who's just gone through, the tertiary system again. And I saw it with my own eyes. I knew what it was like, but having been back in the system, I was at a private college, right? So it wasn't as bad as, say, like an RMIT or a Swinburne or whatever. But it's interesting, right? I had Callista on the podcast 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
She's 25, right? You're Gen Z. And I asked her, I'm like, she went to Monash. I said, how did you get through Monash and not end up a socialist, right? Like it's so rooted in academia. And she said it was a combination of things, but the biggest thing was it just defied common sense. So anytime something would be introduced, it just went against what felt natural to her. And, I think that speaks volumes for her upbringing. But I read a book the other day, and for the life of me, I cannot remember the author. She's a young girl out of Britain, and she was talking about the commodification of Gen Z and young women. And it's a combination of things, and I won't bore you with it, but it's called... God, I can't even remember. It's off the tip of my tongue. I'll remember it and I'll say it at the end of the podcast when it hits me. But basically, it's talking about, when I say commodification of women, thanks to social media and a lot of these progressive activism kind of things, young girls are more under scrutiny than ever before. They're bullied into submission to take on activist causes. Every part of the way they show up as a teenager or as an adolescent is managed and commodified for public consumption. And they're now coming of age. That generation that was under the pressure of TikTok during the COVID years, they're all hitting 18, 19, 20, and they're faced with the consequences of putting all... there we go, Freya India. Thank you so much, Tony Wong. That was it. Freya India, and the name of the book, if anyone remembers it. And so what she talks about in this book, she is one of the Gen Zs that's come of age, is that they're now understanding the consequences of showing up online in the way that they did. And there's an element of shame associated with it, an element of... the silly things that you say when you're a kid, right? It's now documented. And their parents have also documented it. So there's no privacy. And so it's not going to be the case. It's not going to be the case for all Gen Z. But there is always going to be this rebellion to the status quo, right? So if you've got a generation of kids who've only known social media, who've only known how to put their life online and live under permanent scrutiny, it gets exhausting. And I think you'll see this with a lot of the activist types. There's been a lot of them breaking off from the pact recently. There's another girl, British girl, who was a climate activist, very much down the rabbit hole, a big fan of Greta. And she broke away and she saw the light. And I would put Hughesy in the same category. Not that Hughesy's a young girl, but it's the same kind of thing happening. When it comes to a point where no amount of gaslighting can hold up that facade anymore, the cracks start to show. As soon as people sort of recover from the spell, you cannot unsee it. It's like Humpty Dumpty. It falls off the wall. You can't put it back together again. And so when you shatter people's illusions, it's worse than a conservative. They're resentful because they're looking back and going, hang on a minute. I've been robbed. I've been hard done by. And then they become resentful. and then that breeds contempt, and then they vote that way. I really do think we've seen this before, and I think we'll see this again with this generation. Not all. There's definitely going to be some of them who'll be progressive till they die, like an Abby Chatfield, like she'll never change, unless it becomes incredibly lucrative for her to be born again. But, I think you're going to see a growing contingent of these young ones start to resent the life that they were indoctrinated into. And so Hughesy, if you want to talk about him for a second, obviously he's ruffling a lot of feathers, and a lot of people don't believe it's genuine. How do you feel about Hughesy?
Look, he's a very smart guy. I know he plays himself as an idiot, but he's not a dumb guy. He's obviously a very talented individual that's had a very good career and achieved a lot in Australia. I actually went to see him a few decades ago. He's very funny back then. I haven't watched him recently. But what I do think personally, I'm just personally suspicious because I have tracked political commentators and comedians, especially getting involved in political commentary, because that seems to be the pathway for a lot of comedians. They get involved in political commentary, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying anything bad, but sometimes I've noticed these individuals, they'll change their talking points and attitudes because that's where their viewer base is. It's very hard for a Hughesy to be funny anymore without actually coming to terms with what the government's doing to his audience. And his audience is, everyday Aussies. So he's responding to that. I believe it's a bit of that. And of course, he might be personally disappointed in what's happening with the country and speaking out against it. But if you look at his history, he's very much been someone who's been a Labour ideologue for a while.
Yeah.
And said some crazy things during COVID, I think, and people pointing those things out. Now, again, people can change, and it's actually, I think it's a good thing that more people are speaking out against this, especially people with prominence like that, because it puts pressure on governments.
Yeah.
But we have to be careful because, these are the individuals that I saw in America, for instance, during 2024, the Trump election. They were very much, all these people all of a sudden became pro-Trump because to support Biden, well, this dude with dementia, you kind of look stupid, right? And it doesn't make sense. And so a lot of people became pro-Trump. A lot of these people that were never pro-Trump became pro-Trump. But when things, when Trump got into office, when things really went down, for instance, with, let's just say, with this whole Iran thing or whatever it is, like those issues, you see them go back to their old ways. And then you see them kind of, muddy the waters with this new audience that they've garnered and pushing them more towards left-wing ideas or things which aren't really conservative.
So you think it's a Trojan horse?
Not on purpose. As I'm not trying to say it's been done for a malicious reason by Hughesy. Right now, he's feeling like this, but I've noticed that a lot of these people they have comfort in a certain ideology that they've always believed in, and let's say one nation gets in or something dramatic happens. He might be on board at the start, but halfway into it, he'll be like, "Oh, nah, this is not." He'll try to convert a whole bunch of other people over. Is what I'm trying to say. I'm just hypotheticals here. Yeah. But this is what I've seen in American politics. So a lot of people that support Trump, who've been never Trumpers, all turned on him when things got a bit tough in terms of their own political leanings. And we might be seeing a little bit of that happening. That's my personal take. I don't look at Hughesy as being. I don't base my politics on what Hughesy's saying. Let's just say that. So, but I understand that it might have cut through for other people that might listen to someone like that and be like, "Oh, well, Hughesy's mad as well." But I don't think he's a barometer of anything, massive. For instance,
I don't see him changing it for people like yourself and me, people who are more politically astute. But I think what a Hughesy does, like he's a mainstream, safe kind of character, right? Like he's a safe kind of guy. People during COVID obviously have their opinions about Hughesy, but for your Gen Pop, your everyday Australian, Hughesy was on Nova FM for 20 years or something. He's kind of like a safe space. I would put Carl Stefanovic in the same category. But, Hughesy was on The Project, right, which is quite progressive. But when you lose someone like a Hughesy, it sends shockwaves through his audience, right, because they're used to him towing the line and having those progressive talking points. And I think what it does, if if you're in a group of people and you're looking around, you're going, hang on a minute, I think we've gone a little far here. And I'll use the Greens as a good example. You know, most early Greens supporters were genuine environmentalists, people who genuinely cared about conservation, for example. The Greens now is just basically simping for terrorist organizations like Hamas. And if you're on that cart or that train and it's going down that railway very fast and you've gone from conservation to supporting Islamic terror groups, you kind of go, wait a minute. But if you're in a collective, it's very difficult to speak up and voice your opinion, particularly in a place like that, because you think about identity politics and the way that they cancel everyone if you dare to speak up. You know, it's a hive mind. You get kicked out of the group if you don't get along. And so if someone like Hughesy fractures from the base, the first thing they're going to do is try and kill him, right? I don't mean like knives, but as in like they're trying to get rid of him. Like, your career's done, Hughesy, you're dead to us. But what it could do is actually send some shockwaves throughout the rest of the hive and the people who are also kind of looking around and not necessarily agreeing, but not feeling confident enough to speak up. It might give them a little bit more confidence. So I think it's going to kind of get a few more people feeling confident about voicing their political opinions. And that's
I agree with you. I think, look, the big politics, you know, I think it's a good thing. Obviously, it makes people, like you said, talk about these issues. He opens up a different market in terms of like the different audience that might not be usually receptive to these kind of ideas, right? So I definitely agree with it in that sense. I think I'm thinking more like, you know, very kind of micro as a, you know, what's going on here. As a political commentator, he's talking about, you know, this issue now, and he's been like this in the past. He's this age.
Yeah.
You know, he's not really like an idiot, because he should have always known this. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like a young kid changing their political mind.
Yeah.
He's been around the block, let's say. You know, this is not the things that we're talking about today. I'll give you a great example, and the audience might appreciate this as well. Pauline Hanson, for 30 years, she's been saying these things. That is consistency. And I think we have to respect consistency more than anything else. It doesn't matter if these big name figures now come out and speak about these things. I back people like Pauline Hanson because she's consistent. I trust her more because she's consistent. And I think Australians trust her today because she's consistent. A Hughesy or a Carlz Stefanovic, they come across as opportunists. And we're always going to have opportunists that, you know, they need to find their market now that their general market has moved on or things are changing in their world.
Yeah.
So I look at certain people as opportunists. Pauline Hanson, you can never accuse her of being that, because she has been consistently saying these things for 30 years. And you'll find after a certain age, Carlz, most people are set in their ideological worldview after a certain age. You know, if you get above your 30s and a little bit more, and you've had a bit of life experience in kids or a family, or been in a few jobs or run a business, you have certain views. And I think, you know, Hughesy's not an idiot. He's very successful. He's well off. You know, he's been in these circles. He's calculated. He's someone that's thinking about the things that he's saying. I think he's intentional. And that's why I'm suspicious. So I think it's good as someone that wants to see a political shakeup. Yeah, the more big names that come on board with conservatives in the right side and give Albanese hell, that's great. But I don't think they're the saviors that people maybe make them out to be.
Yeah.
I look at Pauline Hanson as being, you know, someone that I can put up there and say, yeah, I trust her. She's got conviction. She's been consistent. You can't fault her for her views. I think that matters today, because we want people who are consistent. We want people who believe in their convictions. And I think Pauline proves that. Hughesy, not so much. Carlz Stefanovic, not really.
Yeah. I think the great thing about Pauline and her consistency, as you said, you know, for 30 years, 29 years, she's been called everything under the sun. And now all of a sudden, the people who always, you know, thought of her as a joke are looking around going, hang on, she's been right this whole time. And you see the campaign that she's orchestrating for Fire the Liar, right? And it's a combination, or like a compilation of all these moments where Albo has blatantly lied. And some of them are seemingly silly, where he said he didn't fall off the stage. Others, you know, when he generally lied. It'd be very hard to do that compilation for Pauline Hanson, because it's like her maiden speech in Parliament is exactly the same things that she's talking about today. And I think that's why people are giving her more credibility all of a sudden, because now the chickens have come home to roost, so to speak, and people looking around going, hey, a minute, she saw this coming. She's our savior. Pauline all along was the one we were looking for.
Yeah, like I have no respect for like a Carlz Stefanovic, because he sat along there, going along with the lines of everything, and people like us, we're never going to have respect for those people, because it's easy, Carlz, when to talk about issues when like everyone's kind of on side. Like if you want to bash Albanese right now, it's easy to do it now. Like everyone's doing it. Hughesy's doing it. You know what I mean? Like it's just like this thing to do. Everyone's pissed off with Albanese. I look at the people, that have always been consistent in their set of views. I think that's important. There has to be room for people to change politically, of course, and I respect that, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah. But let's be serious, and these are not our political saviors. It's my view.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And there's something I've struggled with, and maybe you can give me your take on this as well, is obviously doing what we did during COVID, speaking up the way we did. It was the worst possible decision for me career-wise. It cost me a lot. And then obviously what happened to me in 2021, and it's something that I still have to deal with, once a day on X. Someone will bring it up and someone will be like, oh, you're that chick from COVID, yada, yada. And so you never really are able to leave that behind. And I think back to some of I'm going to use the word trauma for just lack of better description of how traumatic some of those experiences were. I mean, you got kettled in a protest. Most of us copped a lot of death threats and hate at the time. And, now all these years later, we've been proven to have been on the right side of history, not just about how the lockdowns were disproportionate and cruel, but, with the vaccine and things like that, and the government overreach and the cracking down on freedom of speech and the way that we communicate with each other. I think a lot of people are now recognizing that, hang on a shit, something's gone wrong here. And, if you look correctly, COVID was kind of the precursor to all this. So it's hard for me to not feel resentful at times, because, I mean, Carlz Stefanovic wasn't doing what we did. He had his very cushy $1 million salary, and people like myself went without. And no one was hiring me at the time because I was anti-vax and I was anti-lockdown. It was politically, I was, what do you call it? Like napalm.
Politically toxic. Yeah,
toxic. And I was like napalm to people. Like as soon as you got me on, you're like, it's going to burn everything. But now all of a sudden, we're seeing a lot of people on the right side of politics who are popping up every day. There's a new political commentator popping up, and they're amassing massive audiences. And of course, straight away they're monetizing it. And, they've got merch lines and they've got a podcast, and you sort of look at it and go, yeah, I guess it's easy now. But ultimately, do you think a lot of these people will firstly be able to maintain it and continue it on? Or is it a trend of people just capitalizing on it? Or is it just a sign of the times, the pendulum has swung? Like, do you harbor some resentment? Because I try and
I don't harbor resentment. So I have no resentment towards Carlz Stefanovic. I think my point was that you have to look at these people through a different lens. So like I respect the people. I respect people back then who took really strong stances despite what might happen to their careers. I'm talking about not people like us. I'm talking about people in professional careers. So someone like a Craig Kelly or a Gerard Rennick, Senator Antic, for instance, people that in their governments as well took hardline positions on their convictions. They're people I respect always, because, you're going to get some sort of consistency from them. And that's not the only metric that's important to me. But I'm just saying, like a Carlz Stefanovic, he could have at that time questioned Ali Langdon, for instance. You know what I mean? When he's sitting next to her while she's doing those ridiculous interviews. But they didn't do that. These guys didn't do it. They took part in commercials. They were promoting this and promoting that. And again, that might be contractual obligations. Who knows? But, now he's doing stuff outside of, talking out and speaking out. Again, very good. I think it's important. More people talking about these things is very important for politics. But I just look at it based on that type of metrics, Yeah. Again, I'm reading the comments. People are saying, "Well, people can change." I understand people can change, but we have to always be able to look at people based on their past history as well.
Yeah.
After a certain age, I think that's important. Yeah, we have to be like that, because that's how you end up getting hoodwinked. Like if I look at Trump, for instance. Trump's a great example. You can go back to interviews of Trump, back to the 80s or 90s and 2000s, and he's fairly consistent in his positions and views. Yes, there's small variations where he's addressing things related to the time that he's in, but overall, his messaging is quite consistent with his views, and I respect that.
And I think
it's hard to find that.
People like Trump, I mean, people probably argue with me in the comments over this, but he was a businessman. You can argue how he got his money or whose money it was or whatever, but he had good business acumen, right? He's someone that was managing massive projects in New York, one of the most expensive real estates in the world. And so he came into politics with an understanding and having the lived experience of a private business person. You look at someone like your Albanese and your Jim Chalmers, Chris Bowen, and the whole host of them. I mean, Annika Wells, she's one that's been copying the spray the most recently because of her spending. And you sort of go, these are people who don't have a grip on reality. And your average person who is out there living, the everyday Australian life is getting to a point where they can't kind of toe the line anymore. When you hear Albanese in all of his contempt and dismissing all these claims, Jacinta Allen refusing to look into the CFMEU corruption, you kind of sit there and go, all I can think of, this is probably going to go over your head, but Tyra Banks in America's Next Top Model, where she's like, we were rooting for you. We were rooting for you. It's like, I think you get to a point where people go, I can't be on your team anymore. I can't support you anymore because you're lying, and we know you're lying. And it's always a quote that's attributed to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, but it's actually Elena Gorokova, who said they were lying to us, and we knew they were lying to us, and they knew that we knew they were lying to us, and yet they lied anyway. I think that's very much the state of politics in Australia.
Yes.
So I think it's going to piss off a bunch of their voter base for sure, but whether or not they become swing voters, or I don't think these people are necessarily going to change their ideological position fundamentally at the core. Like I said, Australians are so used to so many socialist things like Medicare or NDIS. Like if people were to go full conservative, they would have to want to destroy all that. So I don't think we'll see that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go
I don't think it plays. I don't think it plays out the way that people are thinking. So we can have dramatic change for sure. And I do, going back to your previous the question you asked me as well, I like the fact that there's so many more commentators and people talking about these things in podcasts, and this is what we want. This is like great, especially for the conservative side. Like it's amazing to have that, because it just means that, culturally, as a culture person that I actually believe in the culture war, like there is actual culture war going on. It's good to have people fighting the culture war for whatever reason that they're doing it. For individuals that are engaging in these things, COVID was a very different time, Carl. So there was actually ramifications for what you said and did. Today, it's a little bit different, which is, again, we should live in a free society where we can freely discuss our ideas and views without too many issues around that. I think the real test comes when people who are doing this do get tested, where their conviction lies then. And I think that's kind of what we worry. That's what I worry about sometimes. And I'm talking about like the Candaces and Tucker Carlsons. These are people that I loved. Watching media in America. Like I really respected these people.
Yeah.
But for me, at least personally, they haven't stood the test of time. For me personally, I know there's probably people here that support their views and all these kind of things, but I found issues in the way that they've managed to use their positions that you never know who's going to be the people that end up leading certain conversations. It just comes out of nowhere. Candace came out of nowhere. Tucker is a bit different, but let's say a Candace, they when you do amass power, it depends on how you use that then, and that's what I worry about more so, not the fact that there's lots of people doing this. I think that's a really good thing.
You touched on a really good point there about Candace and Tucker, because I mean, Australia's 5 years downstream from America. And I just want to unpack that with you quickly, and maybe we can end with this. But, Tucker and Candace, I liked Candace too. I read her book, Blackout, and I thought, wow, like this woman speaks really well. She's young, and I will happily admit that I really liked Candace in the early days. Tucker, not so much, because I don't think I really watched a lot of Tucker. Like I knew who he was, but I didn't really watch him when he was on Fox News. I always sort of saw his stuff because someone else had clicked it.
He was very good. I used to watch Bill O'Reilly, or then even after him, Sean Hannity, then Tucker, Laura Ingraham, like that duo, that three was like really good. Like it was really engaging. If you're into American politics, like Tucker was very good on that. But I guess I didn't follow my own rules about the people's histories, because when you start looking at these people's histories, that's why I'm more careful today.
Yeah,
that's why I'm more careful today, because if you actually look at what Tucker's saying, I'm sorry to cut you off as well.
No,
but if you look at what Tucker's saying today, and if you look at what Candace is saying today, both of these people started out on the left, and they've just gone back to the left, like for whatever purpose there is. And again, I'm not saying that people can't change, but there are people that you can find throughout time and history that have stayed and remained consistent. And if we're looking for thought leaders and people to be the leaders in a certain political movement, they're the people that I would put above someone that's just come on board with a message just because they have a big audience. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead you in the right direction.
I think what you're kind of alluding to there is audience capture. And this is something that I'm so conscious of myself, right? I'm a contrarian. I always have been. Anyone who knew me in primary school, secondary school, uni, wherever, I've always been someone that, like, you think you've got me, and then all of a sudden I'll go the other way. And I do it more out of I guess I'm a natural antagonist. I like to play the devil's advocate. And I'm not disagreeable just out of spite. It's more so if someone's presenting a position to me with absolute authority and no nuance, I will just take the default opposite position just because I'm like, I like the challenge. And so, for me, my opinions are less based ideologically, more so values-based. I know what my values are. They're very fixed, and like an oak tree, like you ain't pulling those roots up. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm there. And the landscape around me might change, the ideology around me might change, but I'm very much fixed to my values. And when I talk about audience capture, what I see is people go where the ideology shifts, or go where the political pendulum is swinging. Candace and Tucker, Meek and Kelly, they're all doing the same thing. I haven't necessarily pinpointed this in Australia yet. I mean, I'll be watching out for Carl and Hughesy and the like. But when their audience captured, they have to keep going to those extremes, to the fringes, because where do you go after calling Bridget Macron a man, right? Like you've got to go to, well, obviously we're wrong about Russia. Obviously Putin's actually the good guy. Like, you know what I mean? And you keep pushing it, and it's Israel, everything's the Zions, And then eventually it's like the horseshoe. You come back around the end and all of a sudden you're back at communism, because to maintain the wealth that they're building, you need to keep your audience enthralled. And it's less about keeping your audience educated. It's about keeping them entertained. And that's what I mean by audience capture, which is why, like, I won't put you and Avi in my basket, but sometimes Topher and Mai's podcast might be seen as a bit boring at times, because we're not like, oh my God, like this is the crazy thing. We're sort of like, we're a bit more measured, and it's not as entertaining, right? Whereas in Australia, I'm just going to use the example, oh my guys, look at this is crazy, get angry about it. Like, great for clicks, great for virality. But if that's what your audience is used to, where do you go after that? How do you get more excited and worked up every time, and so you can start popping cells in your face. So I think that's kind of where Australian political commentators will go to next, because it's like, okay, you've gone down this road, now you have to go down that road, and to maintain the sponsorships, the eyeballs, the clicks and the ratings, you keep going. And that's why CNN ended up becoming Trump FM, right? Like it was profitable. Not necessarily because they believed it. They just saw that's where the money was.
Yeah. And that's kind of what's happening in the social media space for sure. It's audience capture is a massive thing, especially when we talk about global audiences as well now. So, if you look at Tucker and Candace, for instance, they have a global audience, and it's not necessarily, they don't really have to align with, America, for instance, what's in the best interest of America, or what Trump or whatever it is. It doesn't matter because you're talking to a global audience. So you can look at those metrics as being more important to the type of content that you're creating. And we do see that a lot with some of the stuff that they engage in, some of the conversations they engage in. And at a smaller level, yeah, sure, it happens here as well. People have all types of beliefs about myself and Avi. I think I experience it in a different way because of my relationship with Avi as well. And, and those things. But I don't think people really understand that these are just how I am. You know what I mean? These are my views. A lot of people didn't. I never really had an opportunity to introduce my political views to people because, we were thrust into it during COVID. It wasn't really about politics. Just no one was talking about left and right. It was about a certain issue, right? So, for people finding out my various political beliefs, it's been challenging for some people. Like I'm not in line with certain views of the world. Like I don't like terrorists. I don't like Islamic terrorists. As a Christian, I support.
Crazy. How can you not like them, Rukshan?
No, but like if as a Christian, as someone that believes in around my faith as well, like I have no problems, for instance, going to Israel and praying in front of the Western Wall and saying a psalm from the the Book of Psalms and being in the city of David. Like for me, religiously, like there was a moment for me that I wanted to do, and so people look at it through different lenses. They don't really understand, right? So I'm just saying that once you have certain conviction and certain views, you have to be able to follow through and go through with that. So if you look at my comments today, Carly, on anything I post, a lot of things that I'm talking about, people will abuse me for my views. And really, I don't really care because I'm saying what I want to say. So I'm pretty happy with myself. I'm not really impacted by this, right? So, whether it's on, for instance, like I talk a lot of the times I talk about immigration. Yeah. Now, if you've seen my posts about immigration, the immigrants don't like me, Carlz. Some white Australians don't like me, for instance, because I'm not taking the knee to their particular worldview that they have. And even just on the moderate right, people are like, oh, Rukshan, maybe you should just stay out of this conversation. But I have certain views that I want to express, and I say those things regardless of what happens to the audience. And I think that's kind of what we should aspire to be when we're talking about politics. If people are following me, like, it's good that they know that I don't support, I support Israel. Yeah, I support Israel, guys. So when you're following me, you know that I support the state of Israel. Yeah. And I support America. I support the United States of America. I support their war against Iran and war against terrorism. I support defeating terrorists. Like people know these views, and I think that's important. What's problematic is when people don't say those things very clearly, and they try to kind of, trick people, if that makes sense, or present themselves as being a neutral voice.
I find that people love to set traps. I mean, talking about the Israel thing, I told people on my Instagram, I think it was last night, that I'm heading to Israel. And I've been wanting to go to Israel my whole life. I set a goal when I was about 5 that I'm going to go to every country on this earth. And Israel's one of those countries. And it's interesting because I've been called everything since COVID. I've been accused of taking money from Mossad, from the Qataris, from IRGC, from ASIO, like you name it, I've been accused of it. And I think it's because the second you step out of someone's box or opinion of you and you become an unknown, it becomes unknown, people immediately just think, controlled opposition or whatever. I can't tell you how many times I've been called controlled op. And it's interesting because I said on my Instagram last night, I'm going to Israel, and I've always wanted to. There's things I want to see there. I want to go to Bethlehem. I want to go to Jerusalem. I want to go to the Dead Sea. And that's not anything other than I'm a travel enthusiast who's been to almost 80 countries, and I want to tick another one off my list. It's not that deep. And as expected, I had people in my DMs ready to give me a lecture on Palestine, and I said to them, I don't remember asking for you to give me a lecture. Like, you're welcome to disagree. I'm not in your DMs telling you that, you should come to Israel or whatever. And whenever I get into these arguments, I sit there and I go, this must be so exhausting. I'm just living my life. This was a goal I personally set for me. It doesn't affect anyone else, I plan to go to North Korea too, guys, and then Russia and Yemen and Afghanistan. And I'm sure you're going to get offended about those ones. I'm not going to go when I'm going to get myself blown up or anything, but it's interesting because that's my values, right? My values are world traveler and global citizen. That's how I've always been. And because of the way we're so polarized and we need to pigeonhole people, like, are you on this team or are you on that team? People can't fathom that someone like me would make a decision to travel to a location based on that. It's got to be because I'm, working for Mossad. It has to be a nefarious overhand reaching over, giving me money to incentivize me to do it. And I think that speaks volumes for, firstly, the people who think in that capacity, but also I think it's short-sighted for both people because, experiencing the world through that very narrow lens of what political team you're on is going to eliminate so many possibilities and opportunities for people. And I think if I can inspire people to, like, I'm not saying you have to agree with me politically at all, but by, if you're following me, you follow my content, maybe it inspires you to venture outside your norm, try something different, see something new.
Yeah.
I was in China, a month ago, and in China, people are like, oh my God, this is propaganda for the CCP. And I'm like, is it though? Is it?
Yeah.
I'm just eating some I was eating chicken feet. I'm like, I'm just eating some chicken feet. And they're like, this is propaganda. Can't win.
We didn't used to be like that. Like, especially the Westerners, they used to go all around the world, like every place, any controversial place, whatever. No one really gave a crap. You just went there. And I think one of the main things that we've lost is, if you're talking about, because people think they know everything now. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm guilty of this as well, because we have so much information from, different sources and things like this. But until you truly go somewhere and see for yourself and hear from people firsthand, and again, that's not always going to give you the best contextual view of something that's happening, but it adds a different layer of understanding to your views. So if you're engaging in politics, whether you're going to Russia or Israel or even you can go to North Korea, if you go there, you get a different sense for the issues that are taking place. Now, it's not going to be a full sense. It might be more of a tourist view. Most of the time, it's the touristy type view. But at least you've gone there. One thing I can't stand is people that maybe have never been to a place, for instance, and beyond the baseline politics and the discussions that we can have, they talk about other things and histories that really you wouldn't really know. And that's why it's complicated, because you can. When I went to Israel, for instance, it's a bit of a culture shock because, when you're in Jerusalem, like there's people like, all types of different backgrounds, like living side by side, and no one's like killing each other. You know what I mean? Like it's like, it's not the way that it's portrayed online. You go to a mall in some parts of Tel Aviv or Israel, whatever, and there's people in hijabs and like Muslim shops, and like no one really cares the way that we're talking about it online here. Now, I'm not saying there's no issues and there's not a war going on and all these things, but the way that it's portrayed is sometimes different. So if you do get an opportunity to go for yourself somewhere and see for yourself at least the conditions of that place, it changes. It gives you a different dimension to when you're talking about it. You don't have to agree with people's positions on a certain country. Like, one of the complexities, Carlz, without taking this too long, of living in Australia is we have so many different ethnicities living here. And if you ask them about their particular world issues, they will give you a version that maybe doesn't agree with a different ethnicity that's from the same part of the world. There's civil 100%. Conflict. So which side do you pick? I think the main thing to do is you don't really have to pick a side in those conflicts, right? You can be like, all right, cool, that's an interesting story. Thank you for telling me about that. Now, when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East, I'm on the side of the West. I'm on the side of Trump. I'm a Trump supporter. I support what the US is doing. In general, I have an issue with groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. I think anything that can be done to eliminate these groups can improve the situation for those people.
Yeah.
And so those are my convictions, and I go with it on that sense, right? So, but if someone asks me about some conflict in some country in Africa that I don't really know too much about, it's Australia. Like, I'm not going to agree with you and disagree. You know what I mean? I'm not going to pick sides. It is the complexity.
This is the interesting thing, right? Like, I went to Cuba in was it 2018 or 17? It's somewhere there. I think it was 18. And it was just after the embargo had been lifted, and I think it was put back on. And I went there out of curiosity because I've always been like, just as myself, I've always been fascinated with the Soviet Union, with Lenin, with Stalin, and by proxy, obviously Castro and Che Guevara. And so I was like, I'm in the US, I'm going to pop on down to Cuba. And, I'd done a little bit of research on it, but no one I knew had been to Cuba. And I had all these assumptions in my head. And there's a movie I'd watched, which just shows my gross ignorance, but it was called Dirty Dancing 2. And it was set in Havana.
They made part 2?
They made part 2. Was it Dirty Dancing? Yeah, it was Dirty Dancing 2. I'm pretty sure it was in Havana.
Wow.
Anyway.
Okay.
And so I went to Havana, and wowee, like nothing like I had assumptions about. And Cuba, I don't like saying this because I had a great time, but it was also the hardest country I've ever been to. And, I've been to some pretty dicey places. Like I've been to Syria, I've been to Kurdistan, like, I've seen some shit. But Cuba was the hardest, and it was the hardest for a couple of reasons. One was the complete lack of infrastructure. I talked about how back then, it may be different now, to be fair, it may be different now, but you could only get access to the internet by buying this little card, and you had to stand under this one little cell tower. You'd rip open the card, and I think you got like, I can't remember, it was like 100 meg or something. It was nothing. You couldn't even open Instagram, right? It was just enough for me to check my emails and make sure like I was messaging people that I was okay. The water was turned off at 9 o'clock at night. So if you wanted to brush your teeth or wanted to flush the toilet, you couldn't until the next morning. There was all these difficulties that really interrupted the way that I travel normally. No Google Maps, obviously, no access to the internet. And just in general, obviously the Cubans, they're very poor. So we would call it scamming, but to them it's survival. And so, Egypt, have you been to Egypt?
No, I don't. I've heard stories about Egypt.
Yeah, so Egypt is difficult, right? Because they are just there to scam you at every turn, and you just fall into these traps, even if you're trying to be really astute, right? Cuba was very, very similar, but it's hot, you're dehydrated, it's difficult to get around. And anyway, I ended up falling for a trap, and it was 2 young Cubans, a Cuban couple, and they were like, "Oh, we'll take you to get the best mojitos." Now, bear in mind, I don't drink alcohol, so I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if I need that." And then, sure enough, I was picking up the tab. That was the job. Anyway, and I ended up having a great night. So I think it cost me like 150 US or something. I can't remember. But talking to the Cuban people. And when you start to build up a bit of a relationship, you can start to ask the questions. And they took me far away from Havana. I was nowhere near the tourist stuff. I was in, your typical area. It was dilapidated. The building next to the building I was in was completely fallen apart. It was rubble. The glasses were bottles of Corona that they'd cut in half. And it became very evident how poor these people were. And I remember just feeling a multitude of feelings. 1, I was nervous. 2, I was a little bit scared, and 3, I felt guilty. Like it was really interesting, right? And I was young. I would have been, I think I was 30. And after that night, and talking to them about the Cuban government and how oppressed they are and things like that, I left Cuba a day after because it was just so uncomfortable, and I've never forgotten it. And the reason I bring that up is you were saying before about people who've never been to these places who are super invested in. And this is what I mean by ideologically captured, because whenever I talk to Cuba, to people who are pro-socialism, they'll tell me that what I'm saying is incorrect. Oh, that's not true. Yeah. I'm like, well, hang on. I've actually been there. Have you? No, but I can Google that right now. I'm like, yeah, I can Google a lot as well. But I'm telling you now, my lived experience and what I experienced in Cuba is nothing like the internet version of Cuba. And it's nothing like the political version of Cuba, because depending on what political aisle you're in, you'll paint a picture of Cuba. The reality is very different. Topher and I played a video about 6 months ago of a travel vlogger I follow that went to Cuba. And it was a man who's getting gangrene in his leg from what was a very simple wound because he can't get access to antibiotics. Like, that's the real Cuba. That's the Cuba that people don't want to talk about. So it's one of those things. It's sort of like, I think Australians feel confident in their worldview because, we've got access to social media, right? TikTok tells you a certain thing. unless you've been there, I know Douglas Murray said that on a Joe Rogan episode to, what's his name, Dave Smith. Like, you can't have a comment about, you can't have commentary on Israel if you've never been there. And people got really upset about that. But I do believe it. You can make a comment, but I don't think you can have conviction in what you're saying unless you've been there.
You can have general conversations. You can have certain views, obviously, of things which are happening around the world. I think that's fair game. I usually take my views based on policy positions to do with the West. For instance, I look at Western interests. It sounds crazy to people maybe, but I don't really care about what happens in the Middle East besides how it impacts the West. Like, I live in the West, I live in Australia. How does it impact us? Maybe it sounds a bit cold and harsh, Carlz. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I'm like, we don't like terrorists. We don't want terrorism here. If we're going to, get involved in some wars and blow some people up sometimes who are terrorists, who are bad people, let's look at the policy considerations around that and how it impacts us. And I'm happy to have those discussions because it's directly related to the government that's in here, you know what I mean, in Australia, that we're sending money to Gaza, for instance. We're sending money to, or we're doing arms deals with Israel, whatever. Like, I get why people have those conversations. But, when it gets to like the history of the place and, this person was here first and that person was here first, no, like, like you can have a general understanding of that history. But until you hear from those people and you understand that they're never going to agree on some of these points, so sometimes it's even pointless. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really matter. We are just observers at the end of the day on a lot of these things. No, you're not going to change anyone's mind on this.
I think the sheiks in UAE summarize this the best, right? Like, you're talking about tribal wars that are millennia old. This is not getting fixed tomorrow, guys. No amount of democracy is going to fix the Middle East,
No, no flotillas. No, nothing's going to fix these things. Like, this is not that. Either you have complete. Either you have even what's happened with Iran. I don't know if we're going over time, but Trump's kind of had to come to the table a little bit with Iran because you're dealing with a regime that's not the same. They're not all there. So even if they're getting smashed militarily, unless the people there can actually get on the streets and make a change, you have to come to the table and work on something different. And that's sometimes the realities that we have to work with. I think people don't accept those realities. They think that somehow some magic thing's going to happen because their podcaster said something that's like a revelation, and for that reason everyone should free Palestine or something like that. It's not real. It's not the real. That's not the real world. That's not how this works.
No. And even if you did, I mean, someone made a comment in there. It was a throwaway comment, I think, about the money spent in Africa, and I'm like, yeah, that's a perfect example. And this is not a lack of resource problem. A lot of this is cultural. It's tribal. And, I'm going to be called racist for saying that, but it is tribal. The British colonizers, if you will, when they drew their maps in Africa and in the Middle East and went, all right, you guys live here and you guys live there. It's the worst thing they ever did because you basically put tribes living against each other. And these are nomadic tribes, or they're tribes that are based on certain geological locations. And when it comes to places like Africa and whatever, like I'm going to be careful with my words here, but they're killing each other. They don't want our intervention. They want our money. Oh, damn straight they want our money. They don't want to fix it. They don't want to resolve the situation. This is that's their normal. And I think this white savior complex, or this Western savior complex, where we take our taxpayer money and funnel it over there just because we feel guilty or feel like it's our problem. I mean, how many trillions have been spent in Africa now? I read the other day, was it 6 trillion, 7 trillion? And they're still starving. I mean, what was his name? The British guy, the singer that did the Live Aid concert. What's his name? Oh, Geldof, Bob Geldof.
Oh, yes.
That was back when Freddie Mercury was still alive, and they had 1 billion people watching that across the world, and yet somehow we didn't save world hunger.
I mean, it's good. It's good to be aspirational and obviously try to help people and to make interventions where we can intervene for peace and things like this. Definitely, I'm on board with this in the broad sense of what that means. I don't know if there's a point of difference to me and you, Carlz. I don't mind Western intervention in our interests if it increases our national security. If we somehow enrich ourselves. I know this sounds crazy to people, but if we get some benefit from it. If there's some benefit for us for having a relationship with Israel, for instance, and for the US for being in the Middle East, and keeping that area, as stable as possible, because, something different could be happening if they weren't there, for instance. I understand I can weigh up the risks of that and look at that as a positive thing of the West that benefits the West. If we look at the Pacific right now, we've got China jockeying for influence within our Pacific neighbors. So if we have to, get involved with, some of these smaller islands that are around us and, make them more accommodating to the West, if that serves our long-term national interest and keeps China out of our areas, I can kind of understand the arguments for that. But all of that, I think what we tend not to do is we get involved in those big topic things without understanding the impacts here, if that makes sense, on our daily lives. So that's why I think people get angry about it, because, if you're sending out millions and billions of dollars overseas and people here are living on the street, then that's the problem. And there's always going to be a battle between those two things. I don't believe in being an isolationist. I think, we do have a role and a responsibility in our region in Australia, even for a small country like us with a big landmass. We do have responsibilities in our region to have influence, because if you don't, someone else does. So those things are important. And it's just weighing that up, then we can talk about lobbies and people making comments about how I don't care about foreign lobbies and stuff like this. I care about all those things, but I weigh it all up based on what benefits us as a nation.
That's a really measured approach. And I'm similar to you. I mean, my whole thing is you can't pour from an empty cup. And so when I hear about foreign aid that we're sending over, I mean, it's different if it's things like a tsunami, right? Like the 2004 tsunami. I think intervention in that point is paramount. This is something that it's a global disaster. It's impacted a collective of nations. I think coming together, sharing resources, great. When it comes to interventionism, as in we're looking at what's happening in the Taliban right now with the way they're treating women. Intervention, we've tried it. Russia did it first, then the US, and we held it stable somewhat for 20 years. The second we go, boom. And you sort of go, I don't think it's fixable, right? And you kind of look at that sunk cost fallacy. My whole thing is if Australia was incredibly prosperous, everything was running amazing, everyone was above the average means, there was economic prosperity, employment was, everyone had a job, everyone had access, we were taking care of our senior citizens, we're taking care of those who need it, then sure, let's share our surplus. But right now, I would argue Australia is in no position to be sending our money overseas. I look at how many people are falling through the cracks, and excuse me, it's not from a lack of resources. And this is what's frustrating to me. We're resource rich. We're an incredibly wealthy country. A lot of it's corruption. A lot of it is mismanagement. A lot of it is a lack of incentive to change it. I mean, we're seeing in America with what's happening with the Somali crime in Massachusetts, right? Like the Leering Center and all that sort of stuff. To a degree, that's happening here, whether it's through the unions like the CFMEU, whether it's through NDIS and things like that. And what it means is that it's a waste of our resources. And until we're able to develop a system that there's always going to be some corruption, that's inevitable. But when we take care of our own, then we can go, all right, cool, things are doing well, let's intervene. When it comes to war and things like that, I mean, obviously China's very aggressive with pursuing the South China Sea. They're putting military bases in things, and they're trying to go after Taiwan. I think we need to take a proactive approach to that. But every time I hear some gross amount of money is being sent offshore, I just get so pissed off. Because that's our money, and we didn't vote for that.
Definitely. I think, governments have to do a much better job of making the case when they do send money and be more upfront in terms of the reasons that they're doing it. It's always very shady, the reasons that people are doing it. It just feels like, we're giving, Solomon Islands $10 million and it's for some project to do something. And I think you got to explain to Australians we're doing that because, China's trying to build an airbase there. I'm just saying hypothetically, you know what I mean? Yeah. We don't want China in our waters. We don't trust the Chinese. Unfortunately, they are our biggest trading partner. But, deep down inside, we're very suspicious of the Chinese.
We don't want the commies.
We don't want the communists having, air bases in striking distance of Australia, because who knows what that will be used for. So, what the relationship with, for instance, Pine Gap gets everyone worked out. The U.S. military's presence in Australia. I see the practicalities of having U.S. military presence here, because we don't really have, a world-class military like the U.S. does in the same fashion. I'm not saying our military is bad. It's obviously we're a top military.
The US, it's laughable.
No, in terms of training and our, obviously the bravery of Australia, our history, you can't doubt that Australia would be ready to take on any challenge. But infrastructure-wise, we're nowhere as close to the Chinese. So what do you do with that? You have a relationship with a country like the US, and you have their presence in the country because it's a deterrent. You know what I mean? Like, we're getting probably off track in everything we're discussing, but I kind of view the world in that way. And it's very hard for me to move away from that with my views when I talk about things. So, I'm not really this kind of
refreshing. This is good.
I'm not very soft. I don't get emotional about this death and that death. I think of the world more in like practical political sense, and in that way. Not that I'm a bad person, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but historically, you're right. Like, it doesn't matter what page of the history books that you open up. The one thing certain with humans is that we like to kill each other. And I think we have this gross assumption that
granted.
that we're somewhat more dignified and like mature than our ancestors. And I mean, no, we're not. We're bloodthirsty. I mean, if you can live in a society where one side of the political aisle's cheering on Luigi Mangione or Kamalo Anthony or whatnot, or defending Pakistani rape crimes, like we're no different to our ancestors. Humans love to kill each other and hurt each other, particularly to expedite their political means. And so, I think we have this grand illusion that we're somewhat more evolved, but we're not.
No, we're not. I mean, the most tragic, most recent tragic world wars really were between Europeans fighting each other. It was just literally they're literally just massive European civil wars that happened. We say World War I and World War II, but basically it's just Europeans fighting each other in Europe. Yeah. And then other people from the Anglosphere getting involved in the same fight against Europeans when they're trying to, figure out how the world after the Industrial Revolution, how everyone fits into their little empires that they used to have. So this can happen again. And when you do have big superpowers like China and let's say Iran, what America's doing with Iran and the Russians and things like this, anything can kick off. This illusion of safety is just as good as your weapons are. And luckily we're on the side of the US who have a lot of nukes pointing to different places. And, I get a great sense of, safety from that. I'm for that. I know, like you said, history shows us that we're capable of doing really evil things to each other. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. And I very much this is going to sound so cheesy, but I grew up obviously watching Top Gun, and it's my favorite movie of all time. And I look at that and I just think, I want to be on that team. I appreciate that brouhaha, like patriotism and nationalism. And I really resent how we have tried to eradicate that in Australia. Like even the other day, I saw it on X, and it was some young renter had a Australian flag, and her real estate agent had told her to take it down. And I'm like, get
ridiculous.
Fucked. This is disgusting. Like, it's not racist to like your flag and to love your country. And I would argue, that American patriotism, there's a reason America is as prosperous as it is, because they believed in it. It's the most successful version of democracy that we've ever had, the constitutional republic. And then we look at Australia, and I think we resent being strong. We resent being resilient. It's very weird. It's like we want to be weak. I hear the Greens talking about defense spending, and was it David Shoebridge and all those people? No one wants us to develop weapons, and I'm like, I do.
It's ridiculous. If you want to look at why we're suffering in this country, we should have nuclear, not weapons, but at least nuclear energy as a standard. We should be all benefiting from the resources of this nation. No one in this country should be suffering, but we are, because we've taken on all these kind of wishy-washy positions on things like climate and energy and things like this. We're actually forced to suffer as a people. Now, if you look at the Middle East, for instance, like those little Middle Eastern countries with their little oil supply, massive oil supplies, they have monetized that for their people, and they are, not. I'm saying we're still culturally better than them, but at least they're not like suffering like the way that we're forced to suffer for these wishy-washy ideas. You know what I mean? Like there are ways that we could be a great nation, but we just don't want to, go down that path because we're happy to sell that off to corporate interests or these kind of activist class that stops us from being who we can truly be in this country.
What's crazy is that, like, we can sit here, I always attribute this to the climate change argument, right? Like in Australia, no plastic straws, guys, we'll save the turtles. You just go over to Bali or Japan or China, pick an Asian country, everything is in plastic, and it's plastic within plastic within plastic within plastic. And it's the same with weapons. Like, you can argue, Australia shouldn't have nukes, Australia shouldn't do this. Well, that's not stopping Iran or Pakistan or Russia or China. They're developing their weapons. They've got bioweapons. They've got nukes. They've got bloody AI-powered drones that can kill humans.
Yeah. Like, they're not stupid. They're not stupid. I'm sorry.
They're like, oh no, we don't want to have any weapons, guys. Like, we're good over here. I don't know. I just think it's stupid. I think it's grossly ignorant. But anyway, that all being said, this has been a great chat. This is probably the most intelligent chat we've had. Sans Topher,
Sans Topher and Avi, like the IQ goes up a lot,
doesn't it?
Yeah, Topher might not agree, but I think it definitely Sans Topher makes a massive difference.
Do you know what?
Because he's on a different plane.
Topher loves to talk numbers, and most of the time I just sit there staring at him going, he'll finish soon. What? Yeah. I'm joking.
We're joking.
I hope you've enjoyed the chat. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much, Rukshan, for being my co-host tonight. I appreciate it. This has been good.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to jump on any time that you need to change from Topher and or even Avi. Bring me on.
I feel like I've had an intelligent conversation for once.
Let's go.
Before we go, give me your prediction for the next 6 months. What do you think we're going to see politically in Australia?
I think we're going to have an intense debate around race, ethnicity, immigration. All of this, unfortunately, I think there's other issues that are compounding all of this, but I think the one thing that people can point to is immigration. And that's what people have focused in on, for better or worse. And we're going to have to contend with what that means. So, I think it's a good thing overall. I just think it's just going to be a bit of a nasty debate that takes place. You're already seeing the, early stages of it being nasty within the right, I think, as we're trying to figure out, things like, what it means to be an Australian, which immigrants should be here, and all these kind of discussions that we're going to be having over the next couple of months. It's going to be hyper focused on that. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think we just have to be smart around how we approach these conversations, because I do think there's a way to have these conversations. Again, it's not about being afraid to be like, you don't want to be labeled something or called a Nazi or a racist. It's not that. You can actually discuss a lot of racial issues and ethnic issues and things like this without going down the path of dehumanizing people and using slurs. You can have an intelligent conversation. So for me, that's what I'm hoping for, that, I'm willing to engage in different debates and conversations around this and having intelligent conversations. I will be calling out people who are using stupid racial slurs, and it doesn't really help. And the reason I'm saying it doesn't help is it doesn't help because it actually galvanizes my political enemies, which are the left, let's just say, in this particular debate. It galvanizes them, it gives them an upper hand, and it actually helps them. It's like the Streisand effect in a way. You got to be really smart and calculated in politics. And I think that's what One Nation and Pauline Hanson's doing as well when they're approaching this topic, which is great to see, because they are trying to draw One Nation into this and make it about all sorts of racial things and racism and things like this. But she's been very smart about the way that she's approached this discussion, and so has Barnaby Joyce and some of the other One Nation people. So there is a way to have this discussion, guys, in a smart and intelligent way without, dehumanizing people. We don't need to do that. Like, we are above that. We shouldn't have this third world mentality and think like this, we are above that. And that's kind of what I'm thinking what's going to be happening in the next 6 months is around these topics.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think, I hate saying this, but my spidey senses are tingling, and they tingled just before Bondi. I think that, unfortunately, I think we will see a horrible event. I don't think it'll be a mass casualty event. I think it'll be a similar vein to something that we've seen in the UK or in Ireland. Because when tensions are this high and when people feel so unheard and people feel so strongly about their ideology, that pressure has to escape somehow. And we just saw on the weekend, you and Avi were covering it when Pauline Hanson came to Melbourne to have their private function. And
Yes.
there's only one side of the political aisle that's trying to suppress people exercising their free speech around political conversation, and that's the left. It's the progressives, right? And I saw a clip where one was saying, like, one nation need to be killed, or like, death to one nation or something. I can't remember.
Death
Something
to
along those
Australia,
lines.
yeah.
Death to Australia. That's not a threat. That's a promise. And I think this is where I get really frustrated. Like, they mean it. I always say this: take people at their word. What they mean is what they say. And I think you're already seeing versions of this overseas. I think someone will be stupid enough to bring that to Australia. I hope not, but I do sense that will happen. And unfortunately, with racial tensions, you always need a catalyst, and that will be it, and that will continue the conversation. I hope I'm wrong. I'm not wishing that, to be clear, but I see it as
you're right. Yeah, we are in that environment. So if you look at UK, for instance, and the knife crime and stuff, like, people die there all the time, but it's a different element when you have the again, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but when you have the racialized crime type thing happening, and then you see the police response, and you kind of think like, oh well, they're not treating him like they're judging him because he's white, and this wouldn't have happened if the police were more responsive at that time, and this whole kind of DEI thing. I think those things will come out to the surface, and I think Australia is also on that same tinderbox. So we will see, unfortunately, issues like this. Things will get highlighted that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been highlighted. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's good in the sense that, of course, we should be having these discussions, but it's going to lead to broader discussions, and maybe we'll see stuff on the street, whatever. Like we are in that kind of tinderbox that we're seeing in the UK, in some respects, for sure, with everything that's going on.
Oh, it's something to look forward to. Unfortunately, no. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing. As I said, the most intelligent conversation I've had in a while. Thank you so much, Rukshan.
No worries, Carlz. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
See you guys, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys. We'll see you with Topher Wednesday at 7:30. Otherwise, see you all later. Bye.
Bye.